You are live.
Great, thank you, Maria. I'm going to call this meeting of the Gloucester School Committee to order. I'll remind everybody that the mission of Gloucester Public Schools is for all students to be successful, engaged, lifelong learners. It is March 22nd, 2021, and we are meeting in a special workshop to discuss our governance and our policies and our procedures. This meeting is recorded by video and audio in accordance with the open meeting law, consistent with the governor's orders suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law and banning gatherings of more than 10 people. This meeting will be conducted by remote participation. Maria, could we have a roll call for attendance?
Mr. Favazza,
Here.
Chairman Pope,
Here.
Ms. Prince.
Here.
Mayor Taken,
Here.
Ms. Watson,
Here.
Ms. Weason,
Here.
and Kathy.
Present.
Present. Okay, thank you, Maria. Everybody is here. We're also joined by Dorothy Presser, our field representative from Massachusetts Association of School Committees, and as always by Ben Lummis, our superintendent. This evening, we're here to our annual review of our procedures and protocols and policies of how we do business as a school committee. And we have invited Dorothy Presser here to facilitate that meeting, and I'm going to hand it over to Dorothy. So welcome back to Gloucester.
Okay, thanks. I wish I was actually physically in Gloucester. That would be nice. So I have a PowerPoint. I believe that I need someone to enable me to share my screen.
Okay, Maria would do that.
Okay,
You should be all set now, Dorothy.
looks like I am. Thank you. Okay. So just let me get myself organized here. Okay. So what I have for tonight is in reviewing your procedures, your protocols, and so forth, is I just want to set the table a little bit with some big picture thinking. And then I know that you had some things that you wanted to talk about in the way that your policies and procedures and protocols were working. So I've thought that what we could do is take the sort of the way we tend to think about school committees running, and before the meeting, getting prepared for it, at the meeting, and then between the meetings, and fold in some of the topics that come up where we can talk about what are some of the best practices, how is it working for you, how might you think about best practices, and just take things from there. So as we go through the PowerPoint, I would certainly encourage you to jump in at any point and ask any questions or make any comments that you want. So I'm assuming you can all see my screen at this point and we're ready to get started?
Yep.
All right. I would, we want to frame the work, right? Thinking about we're school committee, and the overarching mission of any school committee, according to the National School Boards Association, is continuous improvement in student achievement. And that's student achievement as you define it for your students, not just, test scores and so forth. So that's the job that you have, like the main responsibilities that you have. If you think about student safety, student achievement are the things that you're often talking about at school committee meetings, or where we hope that your work is focused. We often also talk about the roles and responsibilities of the school committee compared to the roles and responsibilities of the superintendent. The school committee and the superintendent both have a leadership role in the district. School committee is leading from a governance standpoint, and the superintendent from a management standpoint, managing the day-to-day operations of the district. Superintendent comes to the school committee with recommendations about goals, about budget, about policy, and so forth. The school committee deliberates over those recommendations, makes a decision and hands it back to the superintendent to implement the decisions of the school committee. So the school committee is thinking about some of those really big picture questions of what and why, how much. And the superintendent, the more, you might think of more tactical questions of how does the work get done? Who does it? When does it happen? Where does it happen? Particularly at the time that you're doing goal setting, the school committee is the bridge between the community and the superintendent. You're bringing the vision and values of the community to the table. And the superintendent is bringing to the school committee the needs of the staff to get the job done. And those two things come together as you're making your decisions and deliberating at the board table. Both parties have the responsibility for promoting trust and mutual respect in that relationship. And when all that is happening and everything is running smoothly, then you have the trust of the community as well. We've talked about before, I mean, some of this material I know is not new to you. We've talked before about the fact that there is also a difference between being the committee and an individual member of the committee. The committee only exists when there's a properly posted meeting with a quorum at the table. And other than that, the individual members of the committee have no individual authority unless it's been specifically granted by the committee, such as liaison work or the chair having some additional responsibilities by virtue of being the chair. But other than that, you're another man on the street. However, as a committee member, you're certainly expected to contribute to and communicate about the vision and values of the community, the goals of the district, to ask those critical questions at meetings that we always know. I think that the best decisions are made when there are a number of viewpoints that can come in and dissect and ask good questions to help get to a good decision. But then once you've had that chance for that deliberation, if you're on the minority side of an issue, there is an expectation that you support the decisions of the majority, which doesn't mean changing your mind, but it means not getting in the way of the work going forward. And of course, everyone has to be dedicated to the work on behalf of students in the district. As a committee, you're exercising your power through the actions that you're taking, governing through policy. You have the fiduciary responsibility to make sure that the financial resources are being used appropriately, engaging the community in the work of the schools, and sustaining that school committee superintendent relationship. And then you're also the employer of record on any collective bargaining agreements that exist. So that's sort of the big picture overview. I know we've talked about those things before. Any questions up until this point? So I'll dive on and talk a little bit about, I wasn't sure quite where to put this next slide in the presentation, and this is where it landed, because the next thing we're going to talk about is, what happens like before a meeting, leading up to a meeting, planning a meeting, thinking about a meeting. So I said that the chair has some responsibilities that go a little bit above and beyond. And one of those responsibilities, one of the reasons that you've elected a chair to hold that position is to guide the work of the committee, to help to work with the superintendent to plan the agendas, to think about what are the topics that the committee needs to be working on. What is the superintendent telling me about things that are coming up, and how does the chair think about those and meld that into the work of the committee. Also has the job of keeping the committee organized and on track by focusing on the mission of the school committee and the vision and the goals that exist in the district and for the school committee. Again, also helping the committee keep that focus on student achievement and hopefully not let the committee sort of get down rabbit holes that may be more operational than governance, and keep that sort of laser focus on using the governance role of the school committee for student achievement. And when it's all working well and the chair can work with the committee and the committee is working well together, the chair is sort of helping by doing all those different things, really helping the committee sort of be greater than the sum of all its parts. Any questions at this point? Okay. So let's dive in a little. Was there a question?
Yeah, I have
Laura.
a question. Just on the chair's roles, my understanding is that it's also sort of the chair is sort of our voice from a communication standpoint to the community.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah,
Okay.
generally, and that often, generally in policy, the chair is the spokesperson for the committee. So a lot of times, and we'll get a little bit more to communication as we go on. But, if there's a question that comes to the committee or a concern that comes to the committee, it's often the chair that responds on behalf of the committee.
Okay, thank you.
So a lot of the work that the chair does is done with the superintendent between meetings and getting ready for whatever meeting is coming up. So the chair works with the superintendent and in some senses with the rest of the committee about developing items that get placed on the agenda. And sometimes, and I think this may be a discussion point here, people think about, how does the committee get, or how does the agenda get crafted, and where, at what point do committee members have input into the agenda, and how does that get planned? Also thinking about when there are questions that come up when you see your packet, or when you're thinking about an agenda item, how do those questions get addressed so that you can have a couple of things. You want to have the meeting not bogged down with too much with questions that might have been able to be answered ahead of time. You want your presenters to be prepared. You might get questions to them, but not the answers before the meeting. You might just be wanting to let them know, these are the questions that we have, so that when you're presenting to us, be ready to answer those questions, or fold them into your presentation so that the presenters can feel like they're prepared, and when they are there, they can help have you have a more efficient meeting, or even a more efficient future meeting, because they're able to get all your concerns addressed at the meeting rather than needing to get back to you with different answers. Also, another challenge that we want to be able to meet and have work well is make sure that everyone on the committee has the same body of information when they're making decisions. So if one person has a question, everybody hears the answer, so that there's that smooth flow of information. Receiving that supporting material before the meeting is sometimes what generates some of those questions. Maybe those bullets should be reversed. And another thing, particularly on committees, I think like yours, where there is a fair amount of work of the subcommittee, thinking about how does this subcommittee interact with the full committee in a way that facilitates the flow of the work and facilitates everyone, even if you're not on the subcommittee, everyone having the information necessary to make decisions and benefit from the work of the subcommittee. So I'd sort of like to open the floor at this point and see if people have questions or concerns, or issues that they'd like to talk about, if you're thinking about these various topics that are on the slide.
I can't
Melissa.
see everybody to recognize them, so please just speak up if you have a
Yeah,
question.
I see Melissa's hand.
Right, so I'd like to talk a little bit about subcommittee work. In the past year since the pandemic, we've all been able to have access to every meeting, which is awesome in some ways, but eliminates lines and boundaries some ways as well. So I feel like this committee is getting towards the point where we all want to be involved with everything, probably because we have more time and we're able to access more meetings. But I'd like to hear from you why you think this subcommittee work is important to have certain people on committees and then reporting to the committee as a whole, as opposed to everyone being involved at the subcommittee level. Because it seems like we're merging into that, and it's no one to blame but the pandemic and the ability for everyone to be involved. When we actually have in-person meetings, not all members always showed up, but now we're at that point. So it's almost, I feel like we're almost crossing that open meeting law a little bit, where we have a quorum there and more than questions are being said. Or also how it is important to divide the work up so that not everybody is involved in every issue by the time it gets to the subcommittees. So if you could
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that, I think it would be helpful for me.
Yeah, and I think
others.
those of you who have been on the committee longer, you know, because I've worked with you, Melissa and Jonathan and Kathy know, I've worked with you over time. And I think there've been other times when you've wondered about, you know, the subcommittee interaction with the full committee. So, excuse me, my throat keeps drying out.
Can I just, would you mind taking down the presentation while we discuss,
Sure.
or are you going back to it? Just,
I'm going back to it, but I'll pop it back up again.
thank you.
There is a way to drag the, so you can see everybody. There is a way to expand what you see on the screen and block out a little bit of the slide, but we won't go into that. So the most effective way that I've seen subcommittees work is that it's really got good direction from the full committee in terms of what the subcommittee work is, and the subcommittee has good and a good idea of what their sort of charge is to bring back to the full committee. I like to think about the work of the committee being driven by the goals that you have in terms of sort of your annual goals for the district and for the committee. And one of the best ways that I've seen it work is that the school committee says, you know, this is what the school committee wants to accomplish this year. And so the school committee sets its goals and what it wants to accomplish. And then each subcommittee goes off and says, okay, so our work to support the full committee involves this, and sort of sets its own subcommittee goals for the work that it's going to accomplish. That, to me, that's some of the smoothest way that I've seen that relationship between the subcommittee and the full committee. I also, you know, if you're getting to the point where everybody's just participating in a subcommittee, and there are places that do it, where every subcommittee meeting is a committee of the whole, and you've got someone else who's not the chair who's chairing the meeting, but the subcommittee, and it get posted differently, but everyone's there. And the chair of the subcommittee will at the appropriate time recognize the members who aren't on the subcommittee. In some senses, I don't know why you have a subcommittee then, other than to have a different chair leading a piece of the work. But I think it's really important to have the subcommittee have a well-defined work and a well-defined process for getting information back to the full committee. Does that help?
Yes, it does.
Not hearing you, Melissa. It's breaking up.
Hear me now?
Kind of breaking up a little bit. Yep, go ahead. Well, while Melissa's doing that, does anyone else have any questions or comments?
I have a question, Dorothy. So what
Yep.
if a chair of a subcommittee wants to take up a topic that is not part of the goals, the annual district improvement plan, it hasn't come out of full committee as a referral?
I mean, that shouldn't happen. The subcommittee should not, I mean, it's a minority of the committee. It shouldn't be taking on its own topics and trying to drive the work of the committee through the subcommittee. Laura.
So just following up on that, as a new committee member, so then, like, for instance, I'm the chair of the new ad hoc communications subcommittee, so any work that we do should come from a referral. So it would be brought up in new business or whatever, or put on the agenda as a question for the committee and then referred to the ad hoc communication subcommittee.
I think there might be a sort of a nuance there of, if you have a general charge, if this is the basic body of work that you're intended to accomplish, then it doesn't mean that every task has to come from the full committee, but the general charge of what you're meant to accomplish would come from the full committee. You wouldn't decide, for instance, you wouldn't decide, oh, as part of communication, I think we're going to go out and find a vendor who we can use to print all these pamphlets about the school district accomplishments that we're gonna portray, convey to the community. That would be something large that you would want to get the full committee to say, yes, we're going to do this. But if the general charge is increased communication and you're continually reporting back on, this is what we're thinking, this is what we'd like to do, this is a decision that the full committee needs to make about what we're going forward with, then that would be appropriate. Does that help?
Yes, very much. Thank you.
Yeah. Melissa, are you?
Yeah, I called it. I think you can hear me now. I'm
Yep,
delayed in
yep.
my picture, but I think my voice is in real time. So, yeah, no, I think this conversation is very helpful. I guess I just get concerned that, like I said earlier, because of Zoom, we're all participating in every subcommittee meeting to some extent. And I remember Mike Gilbert telling me at one of our trainings many years ago, I think it was at the Tech, that if we are not part of the subcommittee, we should actually not be sitting at the table and sit back and just raise your hand to ask questions only, not to engage in the conversation, and that those questions go through the chair to the subcommittee.
So if you're not, if you're not a member of the subcommittee, you can attend the subcommittee meeting as a member of the public, and you would be treated, that's probably not the right way to say it, but you would be considered a member of the public and able to participate the way any other member of the public would contribute at a subcommittee meeting. So, you know, asking questions when it's time for public participation or the chair recognizes you, but not participating in the deliberations of the subcommittee. That makes sense?
We struggle. Yeah, so I think we struggle as a whole, and I'm definitely included in this, is that, you know, when the conversation is being had at the subcommittee level, if we're not a member, we kind of really don't want to wait until the full committee to really look back and say, well, while you were talking about this, this is what I feel. You know what I mean? So I think there's a line there that there's a struggle with for all of us, because we want to engage in real time when the conversation's being had, but yet as non-subcommittee members, we really can't, and we have to wait until it comes to the full committee.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on subcommittees? You want me to put the screen back up so you can see what else might have been on the list? Jonathan?
Just to be clear, if we're having a subcommittee meeting and there's members of the school committee in attendance, often what happens is somewhere along the line in the discussion, the chair of the subcommittee might say, might recognize the members of the school committee and ask them if they have any questions.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not doing that for the general public. So if can they single out school committee members for questions and not open it up to the general public?
That would not be a best practice.
Okay.
I mean, the open meeting law is the subcommittee can only deliberate amongst the subcommittee members. I suppose you could ask the school committee separately, do you have any questions? And then ask members of the public if they had any questions. But you're walking a thin line, I think, by allowing participation only by the school committee members and not the public. The intention of the school committee members in open meeting law terms is that they're attending as members of the public.
Thank you. That's helpful.
I have a question. So is this totally different from the way city council runs their subcommittee members? Is this totally a different entity?
I can't answer that because I really don't know much about city
Okay.
councils.
All right, thank you. That's what I needed to know. All right.
All right. Any other
Anything else? Shall I go back to the screen now and see if there's other things to discuss?
Please.
Okie doke. Gotta find the right screen. See if I did that right. I know what I'm doing. Hang on. I'm not used to going back and forth. Sorry. Okay, there we are. So are there any other topics? I mean, I thought some of the quests, there was maybe some, Laura, I'll stop talking and recognize Laura.
Thank you. Thank you, Dorothy. So I do have a question about getting questions answered before the meeting, which speaks more just to how we communicate via email, especially. So, you know, say an agenda comes out, as a packet comes out, and there's a question about it, or there's something missing, or a perception of something missing, or something that wants to be added. Does each school member, I guess the question is, should we be emailing the full committee? Should we email solely the chair? If we don't hear back in a few days, what's the next process? Just sort of wondering how that should work in an ideal world.
So are you talking about specifically questions related to the agenda?
It could be the agenda, it could be something, that's going to be discussed.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a danger of unintentionally starting a deliberation via email. I think if you email everybody with your question, I think, emailing the chair or emailing the chair and the superintendent, often the chair is conveying the question on to someone in the administration, right, is appropriate. And then you're sort of counting on the chair and the superintendent to make sure that everyone gets the information that was requested in the question. So that might come at a meeting if it's related to a meeting. It might be a communication that comes from the chair and or the superintendent saying, a committee member had a question about, here's the information. And then, I guess if you send an email and it's not responded to, then, following up in whether it's another email or a phone call or something is perfectly appropriate. Does that help?
Yep. I know they're sort of basic questions, but it feels like the time to clarify, so.
Well, and I think you and Samantha have not had the advantage of being on very long before you were suddenly having meetings in a very different environment and not the chance to have some of the onboarding that you might have had otherwise. And Ben, I want you to feel like you can jump in too if I'm saying anything that you feel you want to add to or counter what I say about, the way the practices have been working. So feel free. Melissa.
I can't help but think about a process that I used to be involved in, where when a school committee had a question, a member, and they wanted to ask the chair or the superintendent, first of all, whenever someone emailed the superintendent, we always copied the chair on it. That way the chair is aware of what's being asked of the superintendent, instead of going through the chair to the superintendent. But then once, say I had a question, I emailed the superintendent, I copied Jonathan on the question. But then when there's a response to that question, it's a response to the whole committee. That way the whole committee is privileged to that question with that information.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that always worked well for when I was somewhere else. It's that way the information sharing was equal to all.
Yep.
And the chair and the superintendent were always on the same page as far as knowing what committee members, who was asking what and why.
Yeah,
So that
and there are
might be
times
helpful
like,
for us
and
to
there are
start.
times on larger committees where sometimes the chair is the place where people direct their questions, simply to be able to consolidate things and make it a little bit smoother, that relationship, so the superintendent isn't constantly being sort of interrupted with questions, or gets a lot of emails from committee members with the same question. The chair can sometimes consolidate and say several members have a question about thus and so, right? So that kind of makes things a little bit more efficient for the superintendent. But I think, I think the upshot is that you want everyone on the committee to be able to have the same information, so that people can be making their decisions based on having the same body of information to do it. Excuse me. How about Melissa, go ahead.
So if no one else is going to ask, I'll ask this because I saw it on questions that we were putting forward for you tonight. Developing and placing items on the agenda. What do you see is the correct process for developing an agenda? Like when a school committee member wants to put something on the agenda, do they do it just because they asked? Do they do it at a full school committee meeting under new business? Does the full committee have to agree whether or not it gets on the agenda? What do you know of best practices for that process?
So a lot of times I think that, that by electing a chair, you're asking that chair in some senses to be a gatekeeper to help keep the committee organized, and help keep the committee focused on the work of the committee. So some committees will have like, well, I think you guys do this. Do you have like a year-long agenda that you're looking at the different topics? And those topics include not only sort of the administrative things, like we have to take a vote on school choice, and this is when we get our MCAS score results, but also here's sort of monitoring progress towards our goals. Does that sound familiar?
Yes, we do that. It's a little bit off kilter this year.
As are many things, right? So, in some senses, if someone wants to discuss or wants something on the agenda, the chair may be looking at it and saying, that folds into a topic we're talking about in 3 or 4 meetings. So we're gonna, I'll take that topic and sort of fold it into something coming up anyway. And if it's something that's brand new, the chair may be as sort of that gatekeeper saying, not right now. Maybe that's something that we have to hold off on. If someone wants to sort of plunk in a whole new topic that hasn't been talked about, there may be some thought about, is this something in the community, that is arising, that we need to be putting on the agenda somewhere to start a discussion? Or is it sort of a topic that is important to a member or a few members, but not our focus right now? So when we get to the point where we're thinking about goal setting for next year or discussions for next year, that's where it will land. The committee always has the ability to override a decision of the chair. So if a committee member wants something on the agenda and the chair has said, not appropriate or want to wait or whatever, that committee member could bring it up under new business and ask the committee if it could be appropriately placed on an agenda. The danger of bringing up new topics, to say, can this be on a future agenda, is starting the deliberation on the topic right there when you bring it up.
Can I just push that a little bit? So if under new business really isn't appropriate for developing agenda items, what is new business for?
Well, technically, new business is for business that you haven't discussed before. Right? Unfinished business would be topics you've discussed before but have not finished discussing, and new business are topics new to the agenda.
Okay.
But, and some committees have an item on their agenda called future agenda items, where they may say, I'd like to see on a future agenda this topic. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Jonathan, I can't tell if you're.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me if we want to add something like that onto the agenda. Oftentimes in new business, things get referred to subcommittees, is more likely or more commonplace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So do you list topics under new business, or is new business, what is the new business that we want to be talking about in the future?
Well, it's at the end of, there's, usually we have a thing at the end of our agenda, which is updates on like the school building project or
Mhm.
updates on, and that general heading for all of that is, I forget exactly what it is, but it includes new business
Mhm.
as well as old business. So it's just sort of a catch-all at the end of our meeting for anything
Uh-huh.
that people want to bring up or think that we haven't followed through on.
Yeah. It's sort of with the sort of the change in the open meeting law about being much more stringent in the open meeting law about discussing topics that weren't on the agenda already. I know in our school committee, as the chair always used to say at the end of the meeting, are there any other topics to be discussed at the meeting? If not, we adjourn. And we ended that practice because everything that you're discussing is supposed to be on the agenda 48 hours ahead, unless the chair doesn't have any, unless the chair doesn't know that it's going to be a topic.
Yeah, we don't usually discuss things that aren't
Yeah,
there. I mean, there are usually, if there are things, sometimes there are things on there,
Yeah.
but on the agenda. But I mean, we do open it up for referrals or suggestions, but we don't.
yeah, you don't
discuss
dig
it.
into the deliberation
Right.
right at that point. Yep, yep, that sounds right. Any other things to discuss on this slide? So I wasn't quite sure how we were going to flow this evening. So I just want, if we think about the discussion that we had, and we think about the, are there any things that you think about that you might want to start doing that you don't do now as you're thinking about the topics we talked about? Anything that you're doing now that you think maybe should stop, or any practices that you think are working well that you want to continue doing? And I sort of have this in my before, at, and between meetings. I have this like slide for everyone. We can sort of skip through it if you want and just continue the discussion, or we can take a few minutes to say, are there any changes you want to make based on what we talked about? Laura.
I mean, I think sort of a very simple, easy change that it sounds like we're all thinking about is that given the Zoom format, we don't know how long that'll be, but that members who are not on a subcommittee should not be panelists. That's sort of a simple technological one, but I think that would change this issue of, even if we're present, we're not, we're not in the meeting as a panelist.
Okay. Anything else? Samantha?
I guess I'm just wondering if Jonathan or Kathy, Melissa, or Joel can talk about sort of in the past, in relation to the sort of goal setting at the beginning of the year, how that looked. I think Laura and I had come on and there was a superintendent search and then there was a pandemic. So I just don't think that we've had sort of like a normal introduction to what a normal year would look like. So how does that look for this committee? I mean, do you guys set yearly goals and then is that part of this discussion every year?
Well, we set, along with there's a process that has been in place for quite a while about a district improvement plan and how it breaks down to school improvement plans. And all of that comes before us. And that's really the goals of the district. The goals for the school committee are a little more obscure, and we don't have as formal a process of discussing and setting those. And maybe we should. But as far as the goals for the district, those are there's a process in place, and normally we're talking about them in conjunction with the budget, because we want the budget to reflect the goals that we're trying to achieve. Those are tied together. But whether there should be separate goals for the school committee as a committee that are not associated with the district improvement plan or the school improvement plans. And we set goals for the superintendent, and they're all tied together. I mean, we try to tie all of these things together so that they're not just sort of all over the place, so that everybody's kind of working, in the same direction.
Jonathan, can I ask a question about
Sure.
that though? Is
Yeah.
there like an intentional conversation where all of those things are sort of tied together so that all committee members are sort of grounded in the same goals as we move forward? Or has that just not occurred, or does it sort of happen in piecemeal?
Melissa?
So to answer Sam's question, I would say, no, we have not done that in a long time. I think the first couple of years I was on the school committee, we actually, under the guidance of Mike Gilbert through MASC, he came in and we sat down as a committee, learned about how to function as a committee like we're doing now. And then he came back and worked with us to set goals, and then also talked about doing school committee evaluations. In other words, we evaluate ourselves on how we're doing those goals. And there was a form that MASC put out to assist us in that. So that is something I can tell you I did in my early years here, and I did a little bit at the tech, but it has not been done here in a very long time. We've been more focused on the goals of the superintendent and the district as opposed to ourselves. And that's probably where we fall short on a lot of our issues, because we're not talking about what those goals are, where we can all chime in and get a good feel of what each school committee wants out of that year or two of service. So that might be something we want to consider that Dorothy can help us with.
So I also want to invite, either invite Ben or put him on the spot, I'm not sure which. I'm thinking about, if you're thinking about when a year is sort of a normal year, do you have any thoughts about how you would like the sort of the goal setting and so forth to flow?
A couple things. First of all, typically as a new superintendent, I would have come in, and by about now, I would have been really reporting back to everyone on my entry plan, and what I've learned about what the strengths are of the district, what the challenges going forward that we need to address, and then that goes into some significant goal setting and strategic planning. I still intend to do that. It'll probably be more on a summer into fall timeframe. So just that's how things normally go in a typical new year for superintendent, or if this was a normal year, which feeds into that. My question actually to the committee and to you, Dorothy, is I get a little confused on district goals and school committee goals, because from my standpoint, I feel like they should be one and the same. So I guess if we're talking about school committee goals, like what the school committee wants to accomplish as a team, like, work more productively, do better communication, something like that, but I just want to sort that out a little bit, or ask you the direct question is, what's the difference between school committee goals and district goals? I kind of see that.
Yes, yeah. So I think a lot of times people consider the school committee goals to be the district goals, and I think the reason for that is because the school committee is the top of the heap, right? But in our thinking, the district goals would be the goals that are in the district strategy, and the school committee goals would be what is the work of the school committee to support those district goals. So it may be around, looking at policies, it may be around communication, it may be around getting professional, the school committee wants professional development in a certain area, but it's really thinking about more, not about, they're the school committee goals because the school committee is over the district. So any goals that are over the district are called school committee goals, which I think is sometimes the way people think about it. It's more, there's the district goals, and aligning to that would be the superintendent goals. Not all school committees have goals. Sometimes, they choose not to, or it's not the way they work. But if there are school committee goals, they should be things that are within the purview of the school committee to accomplish. I often say school committee goals are not ways to sneak more goals onto the superintendent. They have to be things that are in your purview and you can accomplish, school committee. So does that help?
That helps me a lot with that distinction. Yes, it does. I'm not sure if
Yeah.
that helps other folks too.
Laura?
So following up on that, because I was also confused about that. So then when we look at a year-long agenda, it feels like, it's very obvious to me, that the budget, that the guideposts for the agenda are the sort of the things that are in stone, when the budget has to be, when, all the different things of the school year that we at the school committee, that's in our purview. As Samantha said, like this year has been so abnormal, so it's a little bit hard to get a grip on it outside of the budget, really, just as far as timing. But so just sort of as we're saying this, if we have a year-long agenda with goals, right, that are aligned with the district's goals, it feels like that, if that's a thoughtful process, that the goals would be inherent in that, right? If we're looking at a year as a body of time to do work, our goals would be in that agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Is that- does that
So
make sense?
yeah, so when you're thinking about goals and the role of the school committee, you have a responsibility to make sure that there are goals established for the district, that you've provided some direction for where the district is going to head. Obviously, in great collaboration with the superintendent, because the superintendent has a lot of the information about what needs to happen for progress, right? But then the other responsibility of the school committee is then to monitor that progress, right? To not just set the goals and sit back and assume that they're going to happen, but to monitor and make sure that they are being implemented and they are making the progress that you want. So then if you're thinking about a year-long agenda and you've set goals that have key actions and benchmarks so that you're monitoring that progress, then what the agenda is doing for you is, the year-long agenda is doing for you is saying, in order to monitor the progress on those goals, when is the appropriate point for us to have particular presentations that keep us updated on progress? For school committee goals, when are the important times for us to accomplish certain benchmarks in our goals? And if it's subcommittee work, report back to the subcommittee. If it's the school committee making a decision, when does the school committee make the decision, and so forth? Does that make sense?
That's great. Thank you.
Melissa, you don't have your hand up, right? You're just adjusting the light. Okay. Okay.
And then I could also just add to that, just to be a little more specific about timing is, for this year, I'm hoping to share, a draft of district-wide goal, like long-term goals with the school committee in the beginning of August. This is, there's a lot of work. A lot of work to do between now and then. But then that would then, feed in, I assume, then we have to, because this is part of a longer term planning process. But I would see that, sometime in the fall, then we have done those long-term goals, and then you're building on those every year. Those aren't changing every year. They might be adjusted, that sort of thing. But so you should have, at least a really solid draft in the beginning of August for the district-wide goals, but then we'll have, work on and, with your guidance, agree to long-term goals that then can be, then you can adjust the goals for the committee, year to year based on those. But those should be pretty long-term.
Yeah. So, thinking about, you have these long-term goals, and then every year you're looking at what is the work we do this year to get us closer and closer to that long-term goal. And that's the progress that you're monitoring throughout the year. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay. We ready to move on? Let's see if I can more elegant. Did someone have a question?
No.
Okay, see if I can more elegantly share my screen again here. So this it leads sort of right into what we were talking about. If you're thinking about your meetings as the time when you're working on student achievement, when you're thinking about what's the progress of the district, how are we monitoring that progress, you can think about the fact that every meeting you have is sort of a chapter in that story, right? And thinking about that continuity and what's our story about? What do people watching our meetings think that the Gloucester Public Schools is all about, and then the work that's being done and the progress that's being made, as opposed to, you know, being sort of not having a story with a good plot, for lack of a better way to say it. So thinking about using your meetings to be able to tell the community and about the progress that you're making. So that leads into thinking about the meetings and how they, oh, come on, there we go. And how, do you see my screen? I think I goofed something there. Hang on. I'm going to stop my share and start again. Sorry about that.
We could see it there. Dorothy just went out of presentation mode.
Yeah, I'm going to put it back in presentation mode there. Okay. You'd think after about a year I'd be better at this, wouldn't you? Not sure where it disappeared to. Well, we'll go there. Do you see it in presentation mode now? Or not?
No.
But if you hit presentation mode, it might stick.
Sorry about this. I don't know what I hit to goof this up.
I said presentation mode before you begin your screen share.
Yeah, I know.
It should be just the presentation itself.
I hit something I didn't mean to hit. Now we should be good.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Thanks for your patience. So, so these are some of the things that tend to come up that are discussion points about meetings and about having that good, effective, and efficient meeting. Meetings getting too long. The deliberation at meetings, how smoothly does that happen? How do we get to a good decision? Bringing up surprise items or questions that throw people off, whether it's other committee members or whether it's members of the staff. Bringing up new ideas, I think we talked about that already a little bit. Technology devices at the meeting table tends to come up in different ways, and that might warrant a little bit of discussion, and then allowing the majority to set the direction for the district. So some of the things that I know that came up in some of the things that you talked about was the length of the meetings and how, you know, are deliberations happening smoothly and effectively? So do we want to sort of dive into some of the app meeting issues that you might want to talk about? Kathy.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I wanted to talk about. So this, obviously this past year, particularly in the summer when we were meeting weekly, trying to keep on, you know, just keep updated on the reopening plan, and there was a, you know, just a lot of questions about that. That seemed to be an anomaly, but at times it seems that sometimes people hold the floor a long time. Sometimes they ask more than, you know, speak more than twice on an issue. And I know Robert's rules have, you know, particular rules, right? And so I just find that sometimes the questions go on longer than I would guess, you know, Robert's rules expect them to happen. And it's not to say that good information doesn't get out, but sometimes I feel the same questions being asked in a different way. Which is not necessarily progressing the deliberation or the discussion or the information. So how do we just make our meetings a little more efficient in some of the topics that we've had that seem to go on for a long time? And, we have guests at our meetings, and I think sometimes we need to be considerate of their time because they've already had a full working day, and they're, with us because we need information from them. So I'm just trying to figure out a fine balance between the questions, the answers, the information.
So I find, sometimes I think that in terms of when you have guests and they're making a presentation and you want information from them, a lot of times when I ask people about staff presentations, the response is they go on too long. And I think as school committee members, we have to take some responsibility when that happens, because I think we have not provided the presenter with what we want to hear about. They have sort of a general topic, but they don't have enough specifics about what's the information we want. So in terms of questions, the more that, and this is again, the advantage of a year-long agenda, right? So, everybody knows a presentation is coming up. So everybody could get their questions to Jonathan or to Ben about, I know we're having a presentation on special education. These are the questions I have. I know we're having a presentation on technology during remote schooling. And these are the questions I have. So that gets you some of your questions folded right into the presentation and not needing to ask them at the meeting. And then I think that, sort of the protocol of just going around the table and people get a chance to ask a question, maybe a follow-up around the table, and then you go around again, and then you've gone around twice, and then, the committee decides, do we have enough information, or are there still follow-up questions that need to be decided? But, being able to allow everyone to speak once before anyone can speak again, that's what Robert's rules basically says, that everyone who wants to speak on an issue gets to speak before anyone else gets to speak again. And that can help in terms of making sure that people don't hold the floor, or that, someone who may be quieter and not quite so ready to jump in gets their chance to ask their questions or state their piece. Does that help? Samantha?
I've watched a few other communities do school committee meetings, and I like how there was a couple different examples in which each school committee member just took a turn asking questions after a presentation. So they might have had 2 or 3 questions each. They asked their questions, moved on to the next person. And I find, especially on the Zoom platform, the having to raise hands to sort of get noticed situation to be really distracting. And I personally really like the idea of each person at the table asking their question. Where I struggle is when there is, if you have a follow-up question or a clarification question in relation to something, what's appropriate in that situation?
So, in Robert's rules, no one speaks unless they have permission from the chair, right? The chair gives them the floor. Mm-hmm. So if you ask a question and it engenders a follow-up, and you sort of are following this protocol of everybody goes around, you can always say to the chair, may I ask a quick follow-up, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of just passing it along to the next person.
Right.
And I've seen that done in a lot in interviews, where there's sort of, everyone knows they're going to ask a question, but somehow that the question answer made someone have something they wanted to probe more about, right? So they asked for a follow-up and do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Melissa.
So one thing you brought up to help assist our meetings is presentations and a lot of our presentations at our meetings, all of a sudden we're being presented with a PowerPoint presentation that we didn't get to see beforehand. And that I have found to be very frustrating. You know, I think we had an hour and a half or 2 hour conversation on attendance or MCAS, and it's like we're watching the presentation as it happens, and then we have questions. And it seems to me that if we get the presentation first, we know what our questions are going to be, the meeting runs more efficiently. But that doesn't seem to happen on our school committee, and that's something I know I'd like to discuss the policy of doing, is getting the presentation 48 hours before the meeting. And if it's not prepared, then we don't have it, because it's just too much to sit through a long presentation and then have a lot of questions afterwards because we weren't organized in our questions asking process before the meeting. So, I mean, they're all important topics. It's all important information to get out to the community. But I think the way we're handling our meetings on Zoom with the presentations coming for the first time when we see it is a struggle.
Yeah, and Laura, I'll get to you in a second. I would say generally the expectation that school committees have is that they get information, whether it's a PowerPoint or whether it's a narrative ahead of time, so they can think about the questions that they want to ask, or again, get questions to the presenter ahead of time, so that the presenter can actually be prepared to answer and move the discussion along. Laura?
So I had a similar thing, which is really about the length of the presentations. And it feels like an awkward question for me because all of the information is important and relevant. But as Melissa referenced, we do get these presentations that go on for quite a while. And, you know, it's all important, relevant information, but it almost feels like it needs its own meeting at that point because it's gone on for so long, and then we have the questions, and then we still have to go to more important business. Do districts limit the time for presentations, or is there some way to sort of respectfully figure that out?
So there are committees, and we have like a staff presentation guideline, which is, telling the staff, here are the basic questions that we want answered in the presentation. Your role is monitoring student achievement, obviously, but it's a governance role. And there may be information down in the weeds. I'm just thinking of when MCAS first came out, and we had a presentation where someone came and said, it was like question by question, analyzing each question and how the kids did on each question on the MCAS. Like, the guy didn't know that kids knew what a crowbar was. I don't need to know that. I do need to know how where they saw gaps and where they need to do more work, and if they need support in that more work, if there's, gaps in the curriculum that need to be addressed, but not question by question. And this is where I get to, I think that if you can provide some sort of guidance to the presenter about what's important for you to hear about, are there policy implications? Is there, what work can the school committee do to support what you're presenting? What's the next step after this? Are there budget implications? Are there policy implications? Where do you see gaps that need to be addressed in order to further student achievement? Those basic types of questions can be answered. And you're thinking of your role as governance in this. And there's also a part of when presentations, there's also a piece of, informing the community of the successes and the challenges that you're facing. So you want that to be incorporated too. But I guess in some cases need to think about what do you need to know in order to do your job, and that's what you should be hearing in the presentation. I'm going to invite Ben to jump in again if he wants.
Yeah, thank you, Dorothy. So obviously, first of all, absolutely appreciate the feedback. That's something that we've been challenged to do, is to get you presentations ahead of time, and we'll continue to work on that and need to improve it, definitely. I hear the committee's need for that, and I totally agree with it. I think one piece is, and we've talked about this some, we've had this whole added component every meeting, which is how are the schools running, essentially, given COVID? Because typically what I would see happening in the future is there's one primary presentation during a school committee meeting, and it would be, say, for example, like I'll use this Wednesday's meeting as an example. We have, the CVTE presentation. We also have what is going to turn out to be a pretty significant presentation on, going back to the regular school day. In a normal year, we wouldn't have that second one at all. You'd have the CVT one. It would be, gotten to you ahead of time. You'd be able to ask questions ahead of time to, so, James or myself can be prepared to answer them. And we just, roll along. So I guess what I'm saying is, there's something specific to this year, and there are also some operational pieces that, my team and I can improve to support you better. I just don't know that combination this year of the COVID updates, the how we are running schools, which happens at every meeting, is overwhelming. It's overwhelming the other presentations as well. That combination is pretty rough, actually.
Samantha.
Yeah, and I think this year it's just a poor example, right, to base these discussions off of, because we've done so much learning in these meetings. Like, we've had the Department of Health come, and that's not something that we could necessarily prepare for. We had lots of questions to ask of sort of unprecedented situations. So it's really helpful to hear your perspective on sort of the grounding on sort of the normal work that we do and how our meetings are supposed to run in a normal situation. Because I think Ben is right. Our length of meetings this year, we can't compare this year to other years. And I think we've all had more questions than we probably normally would, because none of us have done this before. So I think it's really hard to really think back on this year and not feel totally overwhelmed with how much listening we've done to each other and to other people. I mean,
well, and be very clear that you are not alone.
Yeah.
You don't have any corner on long meetings because of COVID and different learning models and health and so forth and so on. Kathy, I saw a hand up and then it went down.
Yeah, I just wanted to say also, back to the idea that what we've been hearing this year is really important. And so, the example of attendance and work that's been done, I think that was probably one of our most thorough presentations on a topic that we really haven't given that kind of attention to, or even the amount of work that is actually happening within the district. So I think in terms of proportionality of our time to a topic, I think it was a really important topic. I mean, so many, as we say, so many are so important. And in terms of our normal business, those are the topics that I find most, the learning part, how are we going to get kids to learn, really where, I would like the focus of the bulk of our discussions, all having to do with achievement and getting kids to be engaged and all those important things, and MCAS results. And I think our MCAS presentations have gotten pretty streamlined and very kind of the highlights and the challenges. I find them always very informative for both us, and I think it presents it well to the public. So I don't want any staff member to think that we don't appreciate everything they're doing that leads to these presentations. But I do think that, as we talked, I think a couple meetings ago, managing our agendas, and maybe sometimes it's worth having another meeting in between when we have these weighty topics, particularly like going back to school full day. We just have to realize that is easily an hour, and kind of set our mindset into expectations, or push something to a separate meeting if we had to. So.
Yeah, and a lot of times we suggest that, there may be topics that are worth a different meeting setting, a meeting devoted to that topic in order to really dig into a discussion. And certainly some of the back to school stuff may certainly warrant that. But I think that I lost my train of thought. There was something you brought up that I was gonna key off of, and I don't remember what it was.
Well,
It'll come back to me. Jonathan,
yeah, could I just say, one of the things that's been very difficult this year is, and it has to do with the length of the meetings, is that the information about COVID and how we're dealing with schools and you know, all of the negotiations that we've had to have associated with returning kids into the school has been, it is important, and it's important that the community hears it, and it's important that all the answers, all the questions get asked. So I think that we've, you know, I know, you know, let that go on and on at times, perhaps when, you know, but the end result is that we get to the business part of the meeting and everybody's burnt out. And you know, when we're discussing actual, you know, contract negotiations or something, and people are just tired. So maybe we need to restructure our meetings and have subjects, you know, have a business meeting one week and then an educational meeting the next week or something like that. That's just off the top of my head, but. Yeah.
Laura.
And I just wanted to say, I agree with Kathy. I mean, the information that we're getting at each step is there's so much information, you know, that's all important. Like I can't think of anything. There's just so much to learn this year. And there's so many components to what's going into the school year this year, you know, presentations from the Board of Health and everything else, and what athletics mean this year and how athletics run. So, you know, Jonathan, I think that's potentially a very good idea, or somehow splitting it up, because it's all important, and the presentations staff are giving are incredibly, you know, significant and thoughtful and important to know what their work is. It's just that, especially on the Zoom platform, it's there's only so much we can take in a given few hours, or, you know, in a night. So maybe it is splitting up the meetings or something.
And the other thing that is we have a lot more people watching our meetings than we ever had when we had in-person meetings. We've had, you know, it's not unusual to have 40 or 50 people on a regular meeting, but it's gone up to, we've had 400 or 500 at meetings. And because of that, I think it's important that we get the information out there that they're interested in. And usually that's operational about school and you know, and then if we try to fit in an educational presentation about attendance or special ed or CBT, you know, like we're going to do this week, they get lost in the other stuff, because you know, Wednesday night we're going to be talking about how we're going to go get kids back in school full time, and there's a lot of things that we don't, you know, that are being worked out as we go along. And there'll be a lot of questions, and there'll be a lot of people watching, and those people are going to want to hear all the answers. So, but then we're going to try to talk about vocational education too.
And honestly, we have a real challenge with this meeting, because we had, you know, said we're in late March, we were come back to you with an update on the building project too, you know, which that's slated for this meeting, but obviously, you know, we'd love to get that to you, you know, prior to the joint school committee city council meeting next week. But, you know, that's 3 big things, and that's too much, obviously. So sort of struggling, honestly, you know, with this meeting. I hate to put CVTE off again, but, you know, I don't think Principal Cook would mind, honestly. But just want to point out to folks that, you know, there are big, important things that are happening that we want to keep you informed on. You know, my team, myself, and therefore, you know, my team need to do a better job on certain presentations of just tightening them up. You know, I can think of a couple this year that could have been tighter and shorter, but there's still just some big topics here. Again, it'd be appropriate to have a CVT presentation and a building project presentation, and we could do that in an appropriate amount of time. But, you know, in a regular meeting, but you pile on what we're trying to deal with this Wednesday, which is, you know, going back to the regular school day, and the meeting becomes overwhelming very quickly.
I think that's the story of this year in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Somebody had their hand up. Was it Samantha? Yeah.
Just looking at that list that you had, and in relation to one of the questions I had sent, having our cell phones at the desk, I'm just curious what kind of conversations people have had, other committees have had around being on Zoom and having our cell phones close by. Because I know, I mean, I've received text messages from people during meetings and they're expecting a response, and in a normal situation, you're not going to have a parent or a teacher whispering in your ear at a school committee meeting, asking you to ask a question or trying to clarify something for you, or so I think that's a really fine boundary that we all have to just be careful of. So
So can I make it a little more clear?
Yeah.
So anything that comes across a text message that you read during a public meeting becomes a public document.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I mean, be aware of that. The other thing is, don't forget that a school, Zoom or not, a school committee meeting is a meeting in public, not with the public. When you allow people to text you and you read the text and you respond to the text, you're doing two things. The meeting has suddenly become a meeting with the public instead of in public. Worse, it's become a meeting of the privileged few who have contact information with you. And you're allowing people to participate in the meeting without permission of the chair, which is against Robert's rules. So put your cell phones aside the same way that you would if you were sitting around the table.
Yep.
So I think, in some senses, this was happening even when people had their cell phones at the table when we were in person. It's become much more prevalent in the Zoom world, but it's no more right in the Zoom world. It's just as wrong as it was when you were sitting around the table.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
In that same line, Dorothy, the other thing that happens, because we're surrounded by technology at all these meetings, is that we do use them to find information during a meeting. Is is that legitimate? I mean, if we wanted to, and.
So I'm kind of smiling because I'm remembering way back when I worked with you on district governance and your original operating protocols, and this was an issue of if someone was using the laptop in front of them to look up a policy or to look up a citing of a law, was that an appropriate use of technology at the table? And I think one of your, if I remember right, I don't have it right off the top of my head, I actually have it on a PowerPoint later on, that you have something about technology at the table will be used only to further the business of the meeting or something along those lines. And I think the question was that, people they saw people using their laptop, and were they streaming the hockey game or were they attending to the meeting, right? So that was, I think, how that protocol came about. If your policy, if you needed to look up something in your policy manual and it was a paper document, someone might pick it up and plunk it on the table, or have the MGL book of, the law book in front of them. So I think you just have to have, continue your protocol and honor it. That if if you're using it as a reference for a discussion, then that's appropriate. But that would be it.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. Sort of remember that coming up with Tony at one point. Melissa?
So I have a question about technology while we're on the topic. So with Zoom, we all know we can take our pictures on and off the screen. So when we're deliberating over an issue and then going to take a vote, what do you suggest to be our policy for that process? I know some committees will say, you know, you can't vote unless we see you in person. If your screen's off, then you're considered not part of the meeting. I mean, what do you know about that? I mean, I'm not picking a side either way, because I mean, when we're home, we all have a reason to shut our screen off if we get interrupted by something or something happens. But what do you consider best practice for those types of situations? I know that some of the city meetings have discussed if Zoom freezes up, like I can tell mine's freezing up now, but I have my phone, so my phone's in actual time. But if a member is not available, the conversation should stop for a few minutes, wait for that person to try to come back, and then resume the meeting. Otherwise, that person is prohibited from voting because they weren't part of the deliberation or the whole conversation. So what can you tell us or help us with that? Because we seem to have a lot of issues with our Zoom, which is one reason why I can't wait to go back in person, because where I am in Magnolia, and I'm sure Samantha and the mayor can attest to, internet is horrible over here, and slow and interrupted a lot. So what can you suggest for best practices for when a member is not visible on the screen and we're deliberating? What do you suggest?
Yeah, you know, and I'm thinking about, and I'm not sure I have the answer right off the top of my head, because I'm thinking that the AG's office actually came out with some suggestions on that, that there is an expectation that if you're participating in a meeting over Zoom, you have your camera on as much as possible. I would prefer if I can find that citing and get it to you rather than talk a lot about it tonight, because honestly, it's a question that I have not heard come up a lot before. So, you know, I would, before the world of Zoom, right, people could participate remotely in a meeting, and the guideline was everyone had to be able to hear everyone else that was in the meeting. But you could participate through a conference call, or you did not have to be, there did not have to be the visual portion of participation. I guess the question you have to sort of be thinking about, are they actually participating, or do they have their camera off and have they left the room, you know? But you wouldn't know that if it was remote participation prior to the model that we're in right now anyway. I'm not quite sure the best answer to that question at the moment.
Thank you.
I'm gonna flash, if I can do this gracefully and efficiently, I'm gonna try and flash back to my screen here. I think I did it. So anything else on this list that we want to talk about that relates to the different questions that you had come up? I think we talked about bringing up new ideas already. We've had some discussion about one of the things to also think about deliberations. I know you talked about having a lot of questions and how do you pass around the virtual talking stick to make sure everyone gets their chance to speak. Another thing to think about in terms of deliberations, and I think a little bit tougher in this climate where people are just feeling so emotional and tense and tired of the pandemic, is that the tone for the district gets set at the committee table. So people, particularly if they don't have a tie to the schools, they'll believe that the schools are being run the way they see the committee operating together as a governance team. So if there's a lot of divisiveness and a lot of poor culture, they'll believe that that happens in the school as well, which is often not the case. So you want to be able to make sure that you're setting that tone and that culture for the district by the way you're conducting your deliberations at the table. Does that make sense? Kathy?
Yes, it makes sense. I think there have been some incidents lately, one in particular I can think about, that I was on a conference call because I could not dial into Zoom. And because I was not physically present, it was just harder for me to kind of voice my displeasure. Plus I was kind of shocked at one of our members cutting off the superintendent, not once, but twice. And, at that time, somebody, ideally it would have been me, calls a point of order, because I just thought it was a really poor reflection on the whole committee. Even though it's one member, it was allowed to happen. And as I say, it wasn't just once, it was twice. And it was also, I thought, very unprofessional behavior towards a couple staff members. And so I guess I just wanted to get that out there, because I didn't say it that night at the meeting, and I felt horrible about it for a long time, that I was a bystander, not an upstander. And, we are a elected body of adults who are supposed to be professional and treat each other with kindness and professionalism. And that was an example where it was the exact opposite. So what do you advise for future? Just anybody say, wait, we're not going to allow that. Never do that again. You're making us all look horrible.
Well, a couple things. I mean, in some senses, again, you've asked the chair to run a smooth meeting. That's the job of the chair. So the chair can absolutely step in. And particularly, I think a lot of committees have protocols that specifically address sort of the treating everyone with respect, dignity and respect at a meeting. I don't see anything like that in your protocols. Your protocols tend to be more, for lack of a better way to say it, maybe operational as opposed to behavioral, if that makes sense. So you might want to think about adding something into your protocols. Having that in your protocols you could obviously step in and say something, point of order, but having it in your protocols gives you a little bit more leverage behind doing something like that. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Melissa.
So just to add to that, because I know this is a topic not only for our group, but for many groups across Massachusetts. The MMA just actually did a webinar on civil discourse. And it just seems like there's a lot of angry people in the world. There's a lot of frustrated people in the world. There's a lot of tired people in the world. We all want this pandemic over. It's affecting our families, which is affecting us individually, which is then in turn, I'm sure Jonathan can tell you, just from my part, it creates behavior that we didn't expect to put forward, but at the same time, it's just a product of what we've been dealing with on a regular basis with everything that's going on in the world. But I guess to add to that issue with Kathy, does MASC come in, like I know they have on other topics, to work with groups to talk about how we can work with each other with respect and kindness, because to me, it seems we're really going off track on this committee in some instances. And to me, that's one of our priorities. Is that something that you or MASC can come in and have a separate workshop and walk us through setting up policies or procedures to have, other than just saying we're going to do it and it really not making a difference, which is where I would see this going the way we're talking about it now. I mean, I think there's a lot of work to be done on this, what we expect from each other and how we treat each other, and also how we interact with the public as well.
Well, and that's a lot what we talk about in sort of looking at your protocols, sort of thinking about what in some senses sort of the same start, stop, continue I was talking about before. What are the types of behaviors that we want to have on our committee, and what are the protocols we set? What are the norms we set for each other to be able to do that? And part of the norms is always what happens when things go wrong. and looking at how do we monitor if we're following the norms that we set for each other. And I know committees have handled it different ways. They've talked about the norms of behavior. They've taken like a little poll that they sent, each member fills out at the end of every meeting about how are we doing on our norms, get that back to the committee. So you're sort of self-monitoring, sort of a self-evaluation after every meeting. Some committees have realized that they do poorly on some of the norms, so they concentrate just on those for some meetings until they get better at that. But that's, in general, we start that discussion with what does this committee see as the norms that are acceptable for this committee, for this governance team to operate under, to have a respectful, effective, and efficient meeting. Does that make sense? Samantha?
I feel like you guys are probably going to laugh at me when I say this, but in all of the other teams that I've worked in, so I'm a social worker, right? There's so much more relationship building and sort of conflict resolution in real time. There's more sort of checking in, right? So like at the beginning of the pandemic, it might have been helpful just to like acknowledge that this is really tough, right? And that we're all going through this at the same time. That sort of is lacking, I think, just because of the nature of the public, just the nature of doing this work in public. And so I find that to be extremely challenging because that lack of relationship building, I guess, just doesn't, it doesn't help support that building of respect and that building of norms, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and there's ways to do that relationship building. You're right. And I remember when I first, after my first school committee meeting, we were, I said, so when do we get together to get to know each other?
Yeah.
And they all looked at me and like, we don't, right? We have to meet in public. But, doing things like having those goal setting workshops or having some sort of a retreat that includes a meal and a chance to, just get to know each other and we do that. Mike may have done it with you at some point. He or could have if where we just have a school committee retreat where some of that retreat is let's get to know each other and let's do some of that relationship building. One of the huge challenges this past year for school committee members who were elected like right at the beginning of the pandemic or during the pandemic is that there's no pre-meeting chit chat sitting around the board table. There's no on the way out to the parking lot chit chat to just get to know and build those relationships that they may take a little longer because it's a public body and much of the work that you're doing or the work that you're doing is in the public arena. But those relationships still build. You still get to know, what people's hobbies are, about their kids, about their families, about their interests, where they went on vacation, things like that, that help build that camaraderie, which this year has been so impossibly hard to do. We had a charting the course, which we're doing virtually now, right? For new member orientation a couple months ago. And we asked the poll question, how many of you have not yet met your colleagues in person? Right? This was in January. 40% of the people that responded were there, had not yet met their colleagues in person. And that makes that relationship building or continuing the relationships, right, from before the pandemic, all that much harder to do. So Samantha, I don't laugh at that at all. You are right on target with there needs to be, one of the things that will help is not just setting those protocols and following them, but having some sort of way once you can, as soon as you can, to have that sort of chance for that interaction that is not just about the school committee business.
Dor, can I ask a follow-up question about that?
Sure.
So do folks sometimes just have meetings just to sort of like work, I mean, in the public, I mean, but just sort of without necessarily an agenda in relation to like the district, but to sort of work on the function, the working functions of the committee, right? Like I know separate from this, but like if we're seeing that there's a consistent conflict or just something that isn't seeming right, can we just schedule a meeting to say like, all right, let's talk about this. Like, let's
Yep.
work through this.
You can, you're gonna have to post it, but yeah,
Right.
but sure, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Laura,
So just following up on that, because I think that's really, really important what Samantha just brought up. But so we were elected, I was elected in November. So we had like January, February, and then the pandemic hit. And I remember saying early on, like, it'd be great if we could all get a drink or we could all, and I was told like, no, school committee cannot be out together unless it's a public meeting. This is not okay. So I don't see how we can have, even if it weren't a pandemic, how we can actually get to know each other as a group, not one-on-one. I was told that's not something we can do without it being a public meeting.
so social gatherings are an exception to the open meeting law. But you better be really clear that you're not going to talk about any school committee business when
So,
you're there.
right, so for those of us who have kids in the schools, if we discuss our kids, there are fine lines there, right? That's tricky.
Right. So, and that's why, to Samantha's point, to have something where it is a little bit more formalized, but the topic is sort of get to know each other and get to talk about working together, might be a path that makes everybody feel more comfortable about doing it. That makes sense?
I think that in order for us to actually get to know each other, it would be very hard for it to be a recorded meeting.
A workshop does not have to be a recorded meeting.
Right.
A lot of committees will have a summer retreat or a workshop that could be an all-day event or an all-morning event, and it's not recorded.
But we have to invite the public. Is that
You
right?
have to post it.
You have to post it.
Yeah, if you're talking about anything that is anything that's within the purview of the school committee to be talking about, policy, budget, goals, whatever, you have to post it. Yes.
But if we're speaking about just each other, just getting to know each other as individuals so that we can work better together, does that have to be posted?
It's so easy. I would talk to your attorney about it, because it's so easy for those discussions to flow into the other. The other thing that I think that when I first started doing the district governance work, I would go into committees and I would think, okay, we're going to talk about our operating protocols, and I'm going to help them set protocols, and then they'll fly because now they've talked about how they're going to work together. The other piece that I discovered was often missing in helping groups work together productively was that agreeing on the goals. So some of that discussion about why are you on the school committee? What do you hope to accomplish? What are the goals that you are wanting to work on? And agreeing, how do we all move forward with this set of goals or this purpose can also really help smooth out some of that not working well together. Because if people are pulling off in different directions, then you're going to have that pull, really, that discord. But if you're talking about the things that you all want to be working on together, then some of those discussions become much more collaborative and less contentious. Joel.
Thanks. One of the things that I struggle with the most is this concept about, admittedly, I'm frequently accused of springing surprise items or questions, which is one of your bullet points. And so by way of background, so I'm an attorney, so I have a skewed view on things, and I get that. But so my job, I get paid to present to boards of elected officials like boards of selectmen, city councils. I get paid to speak to judges in court. I get paid to speak to boards of directors that run companies. And when I get asked to speak for my job, I need to be prepared to answer whatever question I'm asked. And if a board of directors is reviewing the report I provided them, or if a city council is reviewing an application I provided them, and they ask me a question about it that I can't answer, shame on me. I'm not prepared enough for this event because I need to be the expert in that room on the thing we're talking about. And so I get a lot of pushback when we'll be in a presentation and genuinely for the first time, the presenter who's a staff member says something. I go, well, hold on. We know what about X, Y, Z? And there'll be a lot of pushback from the committee members. Joel, you can't just ask them X, Y, Z on the spot. You need to put this in writing. You're ambushing them. And my opinion is, if they're a staff member being paid to come speak to us about a specific subject, and my question is on that subject, is it unreasonable that I would expect them to be the expert in the room and have the ability to at least attempt an answer, or simply say, I don't know that answer, but I can get back to you on it?
So I think, we talk a lot about no surprises, and we talk a lot about getting your questions ahead of time. And I think sometimes that makes people afraid to ask a question that didn't occur to them until the presentation, which happens, right? But I think that sometimes depending on how big the question is, I think sometimes you can frame the question in a way that seems less of a gotcha and more of a, if they don't know it, they can say, I'll have to get back to you on that. But I think some of the, again, some of the value of the questions ahead of time is that if you're working to get a piece of information that's going to get you to a decision, the more you can make sure that people are prepared to give you that information, the more efficient you'll be in moving your business forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And again, I'm not disputing that when information is available in advance, questions in advance, makes the most sense. But I've felt, this committee in particular, sometimes the staff member isn't even given the opportunity to answer the question that hadn't been submitted previously before the committee kind of explodes about, I can't believe you asked the question. If the staff member was given the chance, because some of them have been, they just answer the question and we go on. But there's a knee-jerk reaction among this committee that, if this wasn't a preset conversation we were going to have, if we go down a line of questioning on topic, it needs to be cut off. And that, again, I struggle figuring out where that balance is, because I just feel like the staff member who's come to talk about a thing should be prepared to talk about a thing.
Kathy.
So Dorothy, I'm going to ask a question in terms of chain of command too, right? These staff members are here. They don't work for us, they work for Ben. And so I think that's where I have trouble with putting a staff member on the spot in and it's a tone thing for sure. When I get bristles about some of the questions or the way I guess it's more about the way they're asked. And you just said, give somebody the option to say, I'll have to get back to you or whatever. So sometimes the issue is the tone, not necessarily the actual question. But my big question is, it's a staff member, it's not Ben that the question's being asked of. And so should that question be either more delicately phrased, more directed to Ben to find out from the staff member for later? I just don't want our staff, I don't want people that come before us to feel like they have been, barraged with, just so put on the spot that they leave feeling bad, as opposed to feeling like, oh yeah, I'll get that information to you. So I'm just curious, the superintendent versus a staff member dynamic of those kinds of questions.
Yes, well, Melissa, I see your hand. There's a little bit of a fine line, right? You don't want the staff member to feel like you're looking at them as incompetent to answer a question, and it has to go through the superintendent. But at the same time, you want to respect their expertise without putting them on the spot. So I think a lot of it is, when those questions come up that did occur to you, just ask them in a way that doesn't feel like a gotcha. Melissa.
So I just wanted to add, and as an attorney, I can say this as well, we are a school committee. We're not a courtroom here. There aren't rules of evidence and interrogation and cross-examination. So I think to Joel's response, we shouldn't be treating each other as if we are a courtroom. It's my understanding the lines are drawn. We evaluate the superintendent. We hire the superintendent, we evaluate him, and we work through him to get information through the district. And to think as a school committee member that we have the right to interrogate a member and tell a superintendent that that's what we're going to do because they're here before us voluntarily at our meeting, I think that's something that this committee needs to overcome. We respect the fact that our staff comes to our meetings, but we don't want to scare them off because of the way they're being treated. It is about tone. It is about the questioning. It is about what you're asking and the expectation of them having an answer right now and then, as if you were in a courtroom and wanting that answer now. We're not a courtroom. We have respect for each other. There's processes. There's abilities to get questions to the superintendent before. And if you can't, then you have to wait for the answer until that answer can come to us in the right way. So I think we're losing sight of what our roles are and who we are. And just because some of us are attorneys doesn't mean we get to act like that when we're questioning people with those expectations that we're going to have an immediate answer or choose to argue if we don't get the answer that we like. So I just think that that's something we need to be more cautious of as a team.
Does that make sense to you, Joel?
No, I feel like am I wrong in expecting that a staff member this is going off of the example that that Kathy gave a moment ago, and that's fine. We can talk about that example, but I'm thinking in general also, because it's been, of the superintendent, same thing, if a question or a department head, these are principals of buildings, heads of department, and they come in and they give a presentation and something they say that wasn't provided to the first time, springs a legitimate question that I feel is necessary to answer before I can, deliberate and vote on something. And, again, I'm asking you, I guess, as the person who kind of oversees all these different committees, am I expecting too much to expect staff to be able to answer questions on the topic at hand, derived from the presentation they've given?
Without an example, I'm not sure I can answer that in a blanket way, but I would say, ask the question. I would say there's nothing that, you ask the question, but you allow for the fact that maybe the question is something that they hadn't thought about or prepared about in relation to the presentation. So, either the superintendent or the presenter says, sorry, I'm going to need to get back to you on that. Without being pressed about why don't you have that answer now?
Right. And I think that's fair. I think any format, I don't know, it has to be an answer, right? It may not be a great answer, but you can't make someone know something they don't know. I understand that. But the ability to ask the question of the staff member, again, if it's on topic, and allow that staff member the opportunity to either say, here's my answer, or, I really don't know, without other members interjecting and kind of blowing the whistle before the question gets halfway out of my mouth and someone is reacting on the dais, right? And sometimes unnecessarily so, because sometimes the staff member is prepared for it anyway.
Well, and I think there's,
Yeah.
sometimes there's a line to be drawn. Are you asking for a staff member some information, or are you asking them to opine on something? Which, that there's a nuance there. Information, I don't know, but if you're asking them to opine on something that may be a little bit of a different, that may be a little bit of a different animal where, the superintendent may want to step in and add some context or nuance or something.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Ben, you're unmuted. Does that mean you have something to?
Yeah, I think that last distinction is very, very important, first of all. So I appreciate that. And I don't want this to get centered on Joel here. Okay. So I do think it
It's
really
okay.
matters, especially for staff, how questions are asked. Okay. There's a really different way of asking a question, whether it's in a sales meeting, a board meeting, a court of law, or in a committee meeting. And I just think I want, in terms of our staff and respecting them and treating them with respect, I think that's where I would push the school committee to really think hard about, is not asking questions. I think you should ask questions, whatever questions come to your mind, okay? But how they're asked and in what manner they're asked. And related to that is that type of question which is asked someone to opine. That's a different category as well. So I think that's a crucial piece in terms of am I thinking about how I want my staff and to be treated. That matters a ton. How a question is asked.
Joel.
So this is a really good distinction. So let's say, for instance, we're adopting a new middle school history curriculum or something, right? And task force is put together with some teachers, maybe principal, admin. And at the end, they come to present to the school committee and say, hey, this is the new history curriculum. We reviewed these three and we're going to adopt, this one right here. What I'm hearing tonight, and I'm just genuinely curious if this is correct or not. So it'd be one thing to ask that staff member who is presenting on the curriculum and why the task group selected it, factual questions about its, efficacy versus the other two they looked at. But would it be inappropriate for me to then say, okay, well, Mrs. Smith, you happen to be one of the history teachers who are going to implement this. Does this sound like a good plan to you? Is that crossing a line? Because now I've asked for her opinion instead of just factual information on the curriculum that they are selecting.
So let me probe a little further. So is Mrs. Smith part of this or the presenter? Or is Mrs. Smith part of the group that put this recommendation together?
She's the presenter. She's decided to speak or been asked to speak because she's one of the history teachers on the panel.
I mean, to me, I would assume that it's going to be okay with that person, or they wouldn't be there presenting the plan anyway.
But still,
to me, that would be kind of a given.
The challenge here is the question being used to drive a wedge? Okay, and questions can be used to do that, and if it's trying to split this person off, because sometimes you will have 6 people in a group or committee and one person has a different opinion, but they understand that the role of the committee is to come to an agreement, not everything of which they may agree with, and move forward. So it is possible to split someone off, ask their specific opinion, and then run with that. And I think that's, that can be that's an example of a case where a question can be really problematic because it isn't. Yeah. So if that makes sense.
So I mean, just think about it in the it's analogous to a school committee, right? The school committee takes a vote, and for a decision to move forward, someone might have been on the opposite, the minority side of that vote, and it doesn't have to change their opinion, but they would they shouldn't keep the decision from moving forward. So if you're trying to drive a wedge that's going to stop the decision from moving forward because Mrs. Smith has an opinion that is going to be expressed that's different than the group, then things start to fall apart. That doesn't seem productive to me. Laura, sorry.
I wanted to probe this case a little bit, and also I have something else which I think was an issue that was brought up, which is this is very interesting to me, and I think it's important about how we ask questions. In this case, Joel, as you like, this person, Mrs. Smith, is a history teacher. She's part of this task force. This task in front of us recommend, right? That's what they're doing, right? They're showing us why. You guys hear me?
Sort of in and out.
Back? Is it back?
Oh, as soon as you asked if it was back, it left again.
Go
All
for it.
right. One more time. The person, Mrs. Smith, is part of the task force there to convince us that that we should adopt this curriculum. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so she is up there saying to the school committee, this curriculum has been chosen for X, Y, Z.
Yes.
So probing, what would your goal, if she's saying what we're recommending to you, what's your goal in saying, are you teaching that? Right? Because ostensibly, that's what she's telling us.
Sure. So what I'm looking for is I'm trying to find beyond the packaged presentation what went into it. You know, so if the presentation, for example, only talks about why option A was better than B and C, but fails to talk about why, you know, where B and C, you know, might have been better than A in certain sections, but ultimately A was the better one. You know, I'm trying to ask a question that might get Mrs. Smith to go, well, you know, I think on balance would be pretty good. I actually really like the textbook that came with B, but overall, I think A is the way to go. So that's why I supported it also, right? A lot of the presentations we get are just like shiny, happy, good news reports, which I understand is a strategy. And I understand talking about, you know, as Dorothy said, the reflection of how these committee meetings go reflects how the district goes. And so it's always nice if you have a really kind of, you know, nice thing, but, you know, no package A, B, or C in that curriculum is going to be perfect. And I want to hear, you know, what A's shortcomings are, because I think that makes it easier for me to support A, knowing, because it's obviously not a perfect package. And the presentation just got with it, it's, you know, awesome. And I bet it is awesome, but there's obviously, you know, drawbacks. And I want to hear that to make sure I understand the full scope of what it is we're approving that I didn't get from the presentation.
So just to probe that, and it just, could that be asked in a way that wouldn't put that staff member on the spot by saying, you know, where do you see the weaknesses, or are there any weaknesses to this program that we should be aware of? Would that be a different way without, because I just want to probe this because I think it's an important issue about how we do this. And I think if you're able to say, you know, what do you think are the weak spots here, or without putting a single person on the spot, it might be another way. I don't know, Dorothy, do you think that makes a difference, or Ben?
I'll allow, it does. I think, you know, you know, I think another way to ask it is, and Samantha, I do see your hand, is, I won't even get into, there are other ways to ask it and think about what they are, because there's going to be 100,000 examples of presentations and different ways to ask questions. So, so Ben, I'll let you step in, and then I know Samantha had her hand up.
Yeah, so I think absolutely. I mean, and Joel, even I think that direct question of, you know, what are the challenges of this? You know, I assume this isn't perfect. What are areas that we have to keep an eye on with this curriculum? You know, the sort of thing that does help the committee members, understand the full breadth of it. You know, I hope we're not just giving you happy, shiny presentations. but I hope we were giving you the straight deal. And if you're not getting the straight deal, I do appreciate questions to say, you know, what else is going on here? What else do we have to look out for? What are areas of improvement? I think that helps us get better. So, but yeah, so I do see a difference in those two lines of questions.
Samantha.
You know, I also think it's an important distinction of what's our job, right? So I think if a group has come to us to present on a new curriculum, for example, I trust that they went through a process that was rigorous, supported by either their principal or Ben. And so all of those sort of difficult conversations about why we chose this one versus another one, I don't know if that's really necessarily up to us to ask them to sort of explain. Does that make sense? Like, to me, it feels like those are issues that are dealt with on the district level, on a school level. And I think asking them to get into the weeds or try to encourage them to think more broadly, I don't know if that's necessarily our job. I think that is the type of work that's done in the school. And then they've done that work to then present to us.
My guess is that you also have, and we should probably move off this as the laser focus of this, but my guess is that you also have some policy that gives general guidelines about how new curriculums are picked. You know, in terms of equity, in terms of a lot of other things. So, Laura, did you say that you had something else?
You're right on it. Yes. So I thought that one of the other questions, one of the other surprises may have been something that happened with me, and I wanted to ask about that, which was, I had wanted to make a statement at the beginning of a meeting. I asked Jonathan about it. I asked Samantha about it. My understanding, my clearly remedial understanding of open meeting law is that I can't ask the whole committee about something that, you know, without, because in order to create something to present, we would have to deliberate. So instead, Samantha and I wrote something, and with Jonathan's permission and foreknowledge, made a statement at a school committee meeting. We did not say it was from the entire school committee. I know that some were bothered by it, and so I want to understand a little better how that could have been improved, sort of how that could work differently, that would be more in line with how this kind of thing should work.
So were you asking, was your objective to ask the school committee to support the statement?
No, my objective was to make a statement as an elected official in the state of Massachusetts in our public meeting.
Was it an agenda topic?
No.
Was it related to student achievement?
Can I say something else? So I'm just going to put it out there. Right? So this was in relation to what happened on January 6th. Our principals in our schools were sending out statements, you know, essentially supporting democracy, right? Like, this is not how we handle a democratic process. And that was sort of across the board. Principals sent out emails. I think Ben, did you send out something as well?
I don't think so.
No, just principals. And so it was more just like we platform to, as an elected official, to speak up for democracy. So like, just to clarify it. And if our principals are doing that, you know, I think as an elected official, we should also model that, was sort of the thinking behind this, why the statement was made. And I think the confusion is it wasn't political in nature. Like it wasn't like, don't support this person and do support this person. It was just sort of a broad, like, as an elected official, we should be supporting the democratic process. And we have it's part of our oath, right? To make sure we defend that as an elected official. So what I think Laura is saying is, without, like, how do you inform the entire committee without violating open meeting law? Is that something Jonathan needs to do because he knew it was going to happen? Or
to me, I guess, I was thinking of the purpose of the meeting is for the board or the committee to be discussing issues related to the schools. And I know that there's a lot of committees that put forth resolutions about, their committees that put forth resolutions during the summer about equity and not supporting racism and so forth. But those are things that I guess, to me, it would be different if you said, we would like the committee to consider passing a resolution with this statement, rather than just using it's going to come out a little bit more harsh than I intended, but using the school committee as a platform for your personal viewpoint. Does that resonate a little bit?
I guess,
Melissa. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Laura, and then Melissa.
well, I just wanted to say around that, I mean, it comes back to like how we, like what we said earlier is that we are sort of representatives of the community in this, right, and the schools. And so,
But you as a body are that representative.
right, we as a body are that representative. So in principle, we could deliberate on a statement in public or a resolution in public and give that later, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so that if you wanted to make a statement and have the committee adopt that statement or pass it as a resolution, that to me is different than a committee member wanting to make a personal statement.
And how is that different from recognitions? Just putting it out there, when people personally recognize something in the schools or outside the schools or previously from the schools.
I'm not sure. So
we have something at the beginning where
Yeah.
people have the opportunity to give a recognition,
yeah,
which is a personal recognition of something.
yeah. I'm not sure I have a good answer to that question.
I guess maybe the question is like, how do we address things that are happening, right? Like, we can't just go on business as usual when something big has happened that impacts our community or impacts our country or our state. So how do we address that? Because I don't think it's good modeling to just ignore things and go on business as usual. I think if our schools are modeling that, then we should be modeling that. And in what way can we do that? That's responsible and representative as the community or as the committee as a whole.
Yeah, yeah. Melissa's had her hand up for a while, so let's hear what Melissa has to say.
Thank you. So I had asked Jonathan to put this topic on the agenda, and I just want to give you a perspective from my point of view, because I wasn't one of the ones that made the statement and I didn't know the statement was coming. So maybe that will help if I say this to generate a good conversation. So January 6th came, and obviously there was ugliness in the world. And then I came to a school committee meeting and I hear two members talking, not not specifically, but about a topic that related to what happened on January 6th. The statements were very well written. They made sense. It was something to be said. But I guess I was just taken back because of my 12 or 13 or 14 years being a school committee member. I have never walked into a meeting where two members or any members made a statement about something that was politically explosive at the time without me knowing that it was going to happen. So I guess that was my first uncomfortableness, is that I didn't know this was going to be said. And like you said earlier, we speak as a body. And then to hear it, which was the language of it was good. I'm not criticizing what was said. It's just how it came about. So it was said, and then later at a school committee meeting, the next meeting, we had a teacher come on and ask, why didn't that statement come from the full committee? So right away, it created confusion. At the same time, we had a school committee, not a school committee, a school district employee have some trouble with a student because of a political conversation that happened in a class. So to me, that was kind of in line of what we were doing. We're bringing our personal feelings about politics to a public school or a public meeting. And I was just concerned of where that can go. I am in no way trying to stop anyone from speaking about issues that are important. It's the process of how they come to us, how they're presented. We as school committee members, we represent everybody in the city that has all different point of views. And for a member to come on and just think that we're all in agreement with what's being said is concerning. And in this case, I'm not saying I disagreed with it, because I thought, like I said, it was very well said. But I'm concerned that a school committee member doesn't know that a statement of that's political or trying to use a platform, our school committee as a platform, when we as a group weren't informed of it before it happened. So I guess that's more where my concern lies. I'm not trying to stop anyone from speaking about important issues, but to me, it's the way that it was presented and the way that the community received it, because even they were confused as to why it was just Sam and Laura making that statement as opposed to all of us. So there's a lot in that happened that would need to be talked about. But I was just hoping that if we were going to allow the school committee to be a platform, that we have policies and procedures in place on how that's going to happen, so that we all are aware of what's going to be said and be able to react to reactions from those statements being said, if that makes sense.
I think the mayor has her hand up.
Yeah, I do. I've been listening, and it's kind of hard because the fact is, I don't know if school committee is the same thing as city council, but I've been on city council 13 years and then here on school committee for 5, but you don't. There's way you can deliberate. You can send an email individually. If you send me an email individually and say to me, what do you think? Would you mind if we all sign on this? That's not deliberating. It's when you send an email, or let's say Joel or Ben, we get emails and then we all respond, reply all, yes. And we start talking about it. This is our opinions. That's breaking open meeting law. That is ethics. That's the whole thing. When you send an email saying, Swati, what do you think about this? How do you, I'm outraged at what's happening individually. That's you and I having a discussion. Then you can send it all of us and say, you know what? I sent this all to everyone, Jonathan. And I'd like to say or read this in my own opinion or whatever. That's totally different. We take a vote on it individually, but to take someone in, it's not about the topic, because the topic, we're all outraged. We're all shocked. And, but the fact is that you still, no matter what, we still represent the whole city, and not everyone believes the way we do. And not everyone believes in a democratic process is being handled correctly. So we got a lot of slack saying that you had no right doing that on school committee. And I said, well, you know what, right now, everyone is suffering. Everyone is, and well, it doesn't matter. I says, well, you know what, then you take it up with the board at the next, meeting if you want. You know what, to talk to me about it is wrong. Go into the school committee. You have, requests before a new business. You can talk about it and explain how you feel, whether they came forward or whatever. But the fact is that there are ways that you can do things, just like, but my concern, and I'm listening, my concern is that what happens is when we send an email out, we got this response, or someone said, you know, we got something on Facebook, and someone will send something about Facebook, and then they'll email us all, and we're all answering each other back. That already, you're having a school committee meeting. We're already, and that's why I said, please do not respond. You can respond individually, but don't reply all, because once you reply all, we are deliberating over something.
Mhm.
And whether it's on an email, or if we were in person, you cannot do that. That is whether, I don't care, if it's a school committee, or I don't care if it's a city council or whatever. That right there is open meeting law, and that right there is ethics. Because we are, whether it's text, whether whatever, individually we can. But when we reply all, or we're fighting back and forth on, no, Joel, it's not that way. Well, I have a right to ask this way. I'm asking that way. We're already arguing. We already have an open meeting law. We just did it. So we have to be careful too on how we respond on our emails. That was my main concern, is how we respond on emails. And you know what, I didn't mind. I was going, more power to them. I mean, yeah, but we can't as city councilors. And it's sometimes, it's like you say, well, if we are school committee and we want to address things, and you think because you're an elected official and that's what they want to hear, then you all have your own personal page to put your own personal things. And you can let them know how you feel there, because you know what, I did that in school committee, city council too, because they couldn't come out to the right proclamation, or she said they didn't want resolution and they didn't want that. But I wanted people to know how I felt personally. And that's how I put it down. And or you could always do, sign on a letter, 2 of you, 3 of you, whatever. But or the both of you. But the fact is, you have a right to your own personal opinion on your own personal Facebook, and no one can say you're breaking ethics or anything else, because that's your own personal page. And that's all I just wanted to say. And yes, I like to not show my face, because whoever invented Zoom must have been a man, because you guys from the waist up look fine. I can't stand this closeness.
Kathy.
I guess I just want to take a stab at what I think our recognition section is for. And it is to highlight school related things, people, events, whatever. I don't think I've ever really heard it be anything other than somehow school related. I know there have been times in the past where, like after the unfortunate school shootings, Jonathan would say, as a comment from the chair, he would say, something about it and express our sympathy and things like that. But that was definitely a school related event, and just acknowledging an event from a factual perspective that was school. It's clearly in our wheelhouse of education. So I just have always looked at that particular section as ways that we can get out there some of the great things, some of the compliments we want to make, and highlight an event we saw, and recognize those things, not as a place if I wanted to say something because I have an audience to say it to.
Laura.
So I hear this conversation. It's very helpful and I appreciate it. I think there may be a little bit of a discrepancy, not on the role, right, of school, of like, from my perspective, just so you all understand. And I do see, and I hear you very well. And I think you've explained this well, Dorothy, and the mayor as well, that without making it a group statement or a group resolution, it's not an appropriate way to do that. And I get that. I do want to say that, like, we teach kids, like, we are the school committee. Kids in school learn civics. They learn history. Their principals made statements. This is not unrelated. I really stand by this. Kids learn how to operate in our democracy. And I know that not everyone agrees in this town. I didn't make a statement thinking that everyone agreed. That isn't the goal. The goal is that we're a body politic, right? We are a body politic with certain civic ideals and rules, and we teach those rules in our schools. And I think there's an important thing to recognize there. This is not a political statement for a candidate. This is Civics 101, and we are the school committee. So,
But we're not
Well,
there
and-
to teach. We're not there to teach, Laura. We're there to actually, we're there to defend. We're there to get them budgets. We're there to operational. We're there to support your teachers. We're there to support the superintendent. We are there to be neutral. So if a teacher is saying they're having problems, like the little boy at O'Malley, I'm not even gonna say his name or anything else. Because of that, you know what? School committee didn't get threats. Ben got threats. Okay, so we're here as an elected official, an elected body to help to help the schools, not to teach, to help them get the curriculum they need to teach, the funding they need to teach, the teachers that need to do that, the things that they need in school, but not to take any kind of political sides or whatever. That's why when I wrote to Gary, I did it privately. I did it because I wanted him to understand. Ben got in trouble. I mean, a lot of people complain, well, why is he doing here? Why do we have that? People are always going to be nasty. Right now, I don't know what's wrong with society. And I thought what you and her, I thought actually I would have signed on. I would have signed on if Jonathan could have said, you know what, this is what Laura and Samantha are doing. I would have signed on and said, let's put it on the school committee page so no one can say anything or whatever. I would have signed on. The fact that Jonathan didn't even, he knew that you were going to do that, but didn't even acknowledge any of us. It just caught people off guard. And so when people were asking us questions, you know, I didn't even see it. And I had to go back and say, well, I'll have to go check the Zoom because I really never even saw a copy of it. So I couldn't read it to them. I couldn't explain to them. So I didn't know. And we still didn't get a copy. But that, you know what, I understand where you're coming from because you're saying like, well, we're supposed to be role models and we're supposed to be teaching the students. No, we're not. We're there to help the parents. We're there to help the teachers. We're there to make sure they get the fundamentals. We're there to make sure that, you know what, things are in school, to make the policy, to help the policies be able to go, the curriculum, the size of the school, what the school and all of that, but not really to aptly teach. We're supposed to be role models, but we're not there to teach. We're there to make sure that the teachers can. And that's what, and the same thing with, like I tell this city council all the time, I'm administration, you are governance. You were there to make the ordinances. You were there to do the, you know, I'm there to actually follow up on them. I'm there, you make the ordinance and I'm there to make sure that you get the budget and the people to do it. I'm administration. So technically Ben's administration, but we're there to help him to do what he needs to do.
So I see Samantha's hand and then I think maybe we should wrap this up and move on.
No, it's okay. Thank you.
Okay, I just, you know, I'm going to go back to say that had it been an agenda item or had you asked for the body to be supporting that, to me, it seems like it would have been different. So, you know, hopefully the world just like goes on beautifully and there's no reason to do it. But in the future, that might be a way to, you know, have it explicitly on the agenda. So at least people know it's coming. Let's see if I've mastered this. Is there anything else to talk about on this before we move on? I'm very conscious of the time. We've already been here for 2.5 hours and I don't know how much more capacity you have for discussion. Anything more at meetings and then we can move on to between meetings? I'm going to say we're moving on. Hearing none. That was my favorite line when I was chair. Hearing none, we're moving on. So between meetings, and hopefully we've talked about some of these things a little bit as we've gone along through the evening. Individual members' role in public, committee member communication between meetings. I think we were just talking about that some. Communications with constituents, engaging the community and the work of the schools and social media. Trying to think of anything, excuse me, in your list that jumps off of that. I mean, we were talking about open meeting law and the cautions of being careful about not violating the open meeting law. Joel, I see your hand.
Sure, I'm always happy to be the example, even if it ends up being the bad example. So there was an issue last summer. The school committee had, voted for site selection for the new combined school. And then our state representatives reached out to, constituents for public input on a procedural thing that the state legislature had to do to enable the site we selected to be picked. And I, in my capacity as a citizen of Massachusetts, provided public input that ran contrary to the goal that the school committee had decided on of putting the school at this site. And at the following meeting, I was, accused of violating one of our policies, which of course says that you will support yada, yada, yada. And to that, I said, well, I understand that in my capacity as a school committee member, I have to, the goal is to get this, project over at the site that's been selected by the school committee. But I wouldn't think that me being on the school committee would have, that any school committee policy we adopt would in any way be able to trump my fundamental First American rights, First Amendment rights, as an American and as a citizen of Massachusetts to participate in providing my representatives with, my input as a citizen. And so one of those two things either I was in violation of this policy, and this policy violates my rights as an individual, or I wasn't in violation of this policy because I was not doing it, at a school committee meeting as a school committee member.
So you're always a school committee member, whether you're at the meeting or not, right?
Sure, sure.
So we talk about you never lose your First Amendment rights because you're on the school committee, but there's also an obligation to the body to support the decisions that have been made, right? The body speaks, and you don't want to get in the way of that decision being able to be implemented. So you would never lose the right, if someone in the community came up to you and said, what do you think about this decision? You would be perfectly free to say, the decision was made, it's going to move forward. I disagree with it, and this is why, but not get in the way of that decision moving forward. So I guess the sort of the rub here, and I'm not sure, this is an example where it's really hard to say there's a good answer to it. In writing to and giving testimony, were you trying to prevent the decision from moving forward?
Yes.
So you have your First Amendment rights, but you don't always have to use your First Amendment rights. So you're sort of in conflict there because the body made a decision, but you then were trying to stop it from moving forward.
But yeah, right. Not in my capacity as a school committee member. I certainly wasn't trying to put up school committee related. Wasn't trying to use any of my position as a school committee member for future agendas, yada, 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 to try and procedurally impact it, But, as a citizen, I had an objection to the thing before my state representatives. And so I guess what I'm asking is, how do we have a policy that, if what you're saying is that they were in conflict, why, is it wise to have a policy that potentially conflicts with our fundamental rights as individuals?
I think there's very, very limited circumstances where to me, it's a really, there's very limited circumstances where you could be sort of on both sides like that.
Okay.
Where, you can disagree with a decision, but getting in the way of moving forward prevents the body from doing its work. So in a way, I think you have to choose. Are you going to help the body do its work or not?
Sure. If I can just, dive into that one more bit, is I'm curious. I find it curious in general because again, all the other elected bodies that I deal with, you know, on the professional side, you know, I've never met elected officials who are hamstrung by a decision that they thought was ill-advised. You know, if a spending bill gets, you know, passed in the State House and certain representatives, you know, thought it was a bad idea, even though they lose on that vote, they're going to go out and do everything they can to let everyone know that they think this is a bad idea and that the spending bill was a bad move, right? And but the budget was bad. You know, why do we have a policy that says, hey, listen, we know you didn't like the budget, but it passed, so you have to zip it, and you can't speak about what you thought how the budget was bad.
But there's a difference in speaking about it. So the representatives who go out and say, this bill was bad, I don't like it. There's nothing they're doing to stop it from moving forward, right? They're not liking it and they're speaking against it and they're speaking their convictions, but it's still going to move forward.
But they're encouraging their constituents to rise up and write to their representatives and write to their governor and say, try and stop this, right? Like they're actually trying to stop things that have been voted on.
It's not clear to me that that's what happens when the vote goes against.
Okay. So speaking out against it is okay, as long as you're not actively leading an effort to overturn it?
I would say other people jump in, but to me, that would be trying to stop a decision from moving forward. You don't lose your First Amendment rights. It's where is your allegiance?
You know, just to be clear, the letter that Joel wrote in opposition of the Article 97 disposition, he identified himself as a school committee member in the first sentence.
Right, but did not say I was speaking on behalf of the committee or my role. I just mentioned factually that I even voted for the site myself. Right?
Yeah.
But that's double standard because you're already saying who you are. I'm a school committee member, but I'm not voting for them. So you know what? You already told people that's how you are. So that means like you represent you. If you would have said, I am a citizen of the city of Gloucester, and don't even mention school committee, this is how I feel personally. But it's kind of hard when you wear so many hats, because I've done that and I have that. And you have to be very careful. Same thing with the Fisherman's Wives. They wouldn't let me vote on the Beauport Hotel because I belong to them. And she already spoke up before we could. There's so many different things that the ethics will look at. And when they look at you as school committee member and not attorney, it's kind of hard, Joel. So, I mean, you have to, you really have to. And you know what? The way you vote, people know, especially with the Zooms. And you can say publicly, you know what, when we're in all committee together, you know, like we're talking about it, and you can say, just for the record, you know what, you can say to us, I didn't vote that way, but let's move forward. So you can acknowledge that you didn't vote that way when we're all in a meeting discussing that. But when you individually write a letter and saying, I'm not school committee mayor, that's like me saying, well, you know what, I'm not writing as the mayor, I'm writing as myself, and this is how I feel. And so, and because you know why? I also have said that, and someone says, you're not allowed to. And I was talking to the ethics myself. I says, well, people are asking me, well, how did you feel? And I say, well, personally, and I feel this way. And they say, well, technically, it doesn't matter how you personally feel. They know you're the mayor, and whatever you have to do, you have to stand by what your council, whatever. And I says, well, how can I when I don't believe in that? It's hard, Joel. I understand, because there's a lot of stuff the same way. You know, I didn't like it either. You know what? I don't like a lot of things that is happening. I'm going like, I'm getting blamed for it, but I don't like it. And I personally can't put my own personal feelings in because it has nothing to do with my personal feelings. I'm going like, really? I can't use my personal feelings? No, because it conflicts people. It says it's like a conflict because the fact is that you represent the whole city.
So I hear that. And so if we move off this example,
Yeah.
I'm genuinely curious what the line is. So again, using this hypothetical of the FY22 budget comes out, and I'm gonna pick on Laura instead of on me being the star of this. And it's 6-1 vote in favor. Laura thinks this budget is trash. She's like appalled by what we're doing. She thinks the decisions are wrong. What is she able to do without crossing that line as far as making it known? Because she's passionate and she really feels, as a concerned member of the committee, concerned parent, concerned citizen, this budget is garbage, and she can't believe we passed it. And is she allowed to be vocal and, you know, let her constituents know and write a letter to the editor and put it on their Facebook page that like the school committee just passed the trash budget? Or is all of that, because it might get people upset and might get people calling the other 6 of us being like, hey, how come you voted for that trash budget, and trying to, you know, peel some of us off? You know, at what point has she gone too far? Because in my head, I always thought we couldn't do like any of that. But I'm hearing tonight that maybe Laura, you know, could.
So, you know, again, I go back to that you don't lose your First Amendment rights, but you don't try to get in the way of a decision that the committee made being carried out. Laura.
I just want to say I have a good example of this, Joel, that I hope will, I mean, in the summer when we voted on our learning, the way we were going to do it, I didn't vote for what we chose to do. And I'm a parent impacted by this. And I didn't come out and write about it. People who knew me said, oh, wow, how'd they pass that? And I said, yeah, I was really surprised. I didn't vote for it, but here we go. You know, we're in, we're going to do it. So I don't know, it's not exactly the same thing, but it was something that I felt very strongly about. And I'm really happy to know I was wrong now, you know, 100+ days later. But there was a case like that where I voted against something that was passed and that, you know, I didn't think was a good idea. And I certainly didn't, just for point of reference, I didn't fight it.
Perfect example. That's a perfect example. You can always, Joe, if you don't, let's talk about the budget meeting. You and I are going with the insurance thing. Okay, we're going back and forth. Before the vote, you can ask any people to come in and support how you feel or whatever. It's after the vote, it's that we don't. But you can have anyone, we've done that before, as city council. School committees come to the city council and say, look, you know what? Well, she was mayor at the time. Kirk's going to cut the budget for the school committee. She's cutting the budget for the school. She's cutting the budget for the library, the senior center. Let's get everyone pack the house. We've done that before. You know, we've done that before. But once the vote's taken, it's like, you know what? Let's move forward. The vote was taken. You can't rescind it. It's going to go forward. We have to work what we have to. But if before, you can do anything you want to bring people to say, you know what, come speak your mind. If this is how you feel, you know, I'm in support of you. Let's do it. But after the fact is, we need to move forward.
Joel.
So then, again, I'm trying to understand the boundaries of this. So another example, I've given this as an example before. So let's say this school committee at one point, before I was on it, took a vote to adopt something called the Plan for Effective Learning Communities that said we're going to have many small elementary schools and no big ones. And I, you know, have been pushing against that since before I was on the committee. And the committee has now reversed course, and we're going to build, you know, likely one, probably 2 consolidated elementary schools that are going to be bigger than this plan was ever going to allow. There's a school, you know, smaller than the one we'll build next after this one. And so at what point am I breaking that policy by saying, hey, I really don't like the Plan for Effective Learning Communities. I really think we need to consolidate elementary schools. That was me actively going against something that the committee had voted on multiple times. It's that entire capital plans and process to carry out this plan of, you know, neighborhood and community schools, and you know, took members to say, hey, we want to do something different. But, you know, arguably, couldn't someone say, hey, you're in violation of that policy. We voted for Plan for Effective Learning Communities. You can't be asking us to go against those plans. That's you. You're impacting the work. You're impeding the work of the decision that was made by the body previously.
Except were these, if I'm understanding right, these are discussions that came back to the school committee. Correct. Right. So that's, you know, if it gets back on the agenda and a committee itself can always rethink a decision and make a different decision. You can vote on a budget and then a few weeks later get more information and discuss it and vote on it again.
So it would not be violative of policy if, again, using Laura as my hypothetical, she thinks the budget is trash. We pass it. She says to the chair, hey, you know, I don't think the committee was aware of XYZ. Can we please put it back on the agenda? I want to see if I can get this budget amended before we pass it again. That would be within her right without her violating this policy, even though she'd be actively trying to achieve a result, which would be to get rid of that positive vote. Would that be okay?
But she's got more information. Ben, your hand is
Sure.
up.
Yeah, I think this example now, is Laura's working through the mechanism of the committee. And within that, committee members are obligated to get other members to support a proposal, to deliberate on one, and then make a change on something that maybe had happened before. But that's operating through the mechanism of the committee as opposed to operating on one's own to counteract the decision of the committee. That I think it goes back to the no individual power, but there's collective power.
To use your example, Joel, what you did and what Laura in theory is voting against would be for her to go to the city council and get up after the budget was passed at the public hearing and advocate to the city council not to pass the school budget.
Right, but again, on a very principled level, who are we to try and dissuade her from doing that, right? Like, who are we as a government body trying to prevent someone, even though we may not like it, and we can, you can all take an issue, I can't believe Laura did that, and that really soured my relationship with Laura, but for us to have a policy that says, oh, Laura, you're subject to censure by this government body because you exercised one of your fundamental rights because we didn't like it. It seems weird that we would have something that would allow us to do that, because I'm at the very core, that pro-democracy, speech, we should be into making sure that any one of our members can say how they feel at a different forum and not have it, splash back on them in a policy violation. We have to recognize everyone's, a citizen also.
Kathy, you had your hand up.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the underlying assumption of being a part of a governmental body, is that the will of the committee is what goes forward. And I assume that's for two reasons. One, you're elected as part of a body, not an individual person. So we're not going to go off 7 different directions after we already deliberate, discuss. We all have the ability to try to convince other people of our position versus their position. And we can't, and the other practical application is, if we all go out and try to rethink every decision, if we're on the losing end of a vote, work would never get done. We'd never move on. So it's not just Gloucester's policy that we support the decision of the body. It is a collective way government bodies work. And so it's almost like being a poor loser if you go out and then try to stop the decision at yet the next official point. It's one thing, as Dorothy said, to speak as, I didn't like it because of this or this. It's another to say, I'm now going to go to the next level and I'm going to stop it at the next level because I could not convince my other ridiculously dumb members of my own committee of my position. I'm going to go try to go to the next level because I'm going to convince them and they're going to believe me. So it's to keep the work moving on and not to impede the work. This is the body at which we try to deliberate, we try to discuss, we try to persuade, and bring as much information, and everybody still at the end of the day has their right to their decision on the vote. And sometimes we win, we're on the prevailing side of the vote, and sometimes we're on the dissenting side of the vote. I mean, there's been votes that I've been on the dissenting side and I wasn't happy, but I didn't do anything after that. It was what it was.
Right. And I'm not saying that, I don't know what words you use as far as like welcomed or encouraged. I'm just looking for, it seemed weird to me we had a policy, but you could be in violation of a policy for doing what you were allowed to do as a citizen. I could see if it was a best practice, like Dorothy's been speaking, using that term, the best practice to make sure that you support the will, but it just seemed weird we have a policy that said, if you do this, you're in violation of a policy that we, a governmental body, had established. It just seemed overreaching, I appreciate what you're saying as far as rethinking everything and the repercussions of it, but it just seemed weird we had a policy that could be used to punish someone for otherwise doing, you know, what they had a right to do generally.
Wouldn't this be a case then where if a committee member wants the policy changed, they do the work with committee members to get the policy changed? I mean,
I was just going to say the same thing.
Yeah, no, I've asked for the policy to be put on the agenda 3 separate times, but it doesn't make it. So this is my first opportunity since July to talk about it at a meeting.
I'm not sure this discussion is going to get us much further.
That's fine.
Yeah, I'm wondering if are there other things on the list? Do you want me to put the list back up, or Laura, go ahead.
Just one thing I'd love to just get some clarity on, and I bet there's some MASC policy. When we get, when we as a school committee, and sometimes Ben and Greg we get group emails from constituents, from parents, or mostly from parents, sometimes from teachers. I'm never clear on how we respond. Do we respond to everyone plus the parent? Do we respond only to the parent? Like, just what's the protocol on that? Because I never know quite what to do.
So I wish there was a very clear policy on that. It is more a protocol. And it is more, you know, sometimes we get into these discussions and workshops like this, like, what if it comes this way? What if it comes that way? What if it's, you know, where does it, you're never going to come up with a list of protocols that covers everything. I think in general, you sort of have to have some understandings of how those get handled. And that may vary from committee to committee and district to district. If it comes to generally, I would say the most prevalent protocol is if something comes to the entire committee, it's the chair is the spokesperson for the committee. So the chair would respond. The response may be, I'm passing this along to get in touch with, or this is going to be on our agenda in a few weeks, come to the meeting, or, you know, whatever the appropriate response is. Generally, if it comes to the whole committee, you count on the chair as being spokesperson to either send the person to the right place or have some sort of response. A lot of times committee members will say, well, I want people to know I saw it. But so acknowledging it if you choose, but saying, you know, thank you for your email. You know, our policy is, or our protocol is that, you know, the chair will make sure that you get a response or an answer, is often the way committees may look at that. If an individual wants to respond, just to acknowledge receipt. If individual, you know, getting individual emails that are sent to you as an individual school committee member, I think you need to make, you know, oftentimes that's responding to help people get to the place that they need to get, or if it's you know, if it's a topic that someone's emailing, like a hot topic that's being discussed at the time at the school committee or in the community, you know, you may want to get that to the chair so everyone sees it. I think in some cases that's sort of a protocol that committees have different ideas on how to handle. Does that help at all, or did that just muddy the waters totally?
It helps. I mean, as you know, I run our Facebook group, and one of the things we have on our Facebook group is like, we don't take any correspondence this way. Please write us as a school committee if you have an issue for the Gloucester School Committee.
Mm-hmm.
But then it leads to this question of, you know, how do we acknowledge that we're seeing these? I just want to be sure. I really feel like it's important that we are responding to people and that people know we're seeing what they're sending us.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, maybe we have to come up with this, Jonathan, or we have to come up with a protocol, but I don't like the feeling at all that people write to us and it just goes into the ether.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I don't, you know, it's just a question, and I really want to be sure we're responding to people, like, you know, consistently and promptly and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Do you, what happens now? Do you,
they come to us. Sometimes people respond, sometimes they don't, you know, sometimes, you know, like if you know someone, sometimes they'll write to you individually. If not, they write to all of us and one of us responds, or we might respond just individually. There's no clear protocol that I'm aware of.
Mhm. So people that have been on for longer, Melissa, Kathy, Jonathan, any history of how things, emails, correspondence gets handled?
I don't, we've never really had an official protocol. I'll often say, thank you for, sending your thoughts or something like that. Or if it's something pretty easily answered or, something as simple as that's on our agenda, on blah, blah, blah. I never get into any debate, any opinion. So it's either thank you or it's information that I can send back. That's committee information.
Mhm.
But we've never really had an agreement as to what happened.
And I would say the same. I would also say that I think this year is unusual for getting more emails than usual with people. It's more complaints about the way the district is running or suggestions on how to run it better due to COVID. So I think there's more outreach to us this year as opposed in the past. But in the past, usually when we received emails, it was on something that we were going to vote on eventually. So that's probably the difference. We don't have a protocol in place. It's never been an issue. But this year, we're clearly being, there's more outreach to us than in the past because of the COVID situation. So we probably should talk about a protocol.
I think it's a great idea. I admit, when an email comes in, I just, like Laura said, I just don't want people to think that they're not being read. And so, oftentimes I'll wait a little bit and I'll see if anything comes out. And I just don't know if people are responding privately, because if they just do a reply, maybe for all I know, 3 different members have already replied to them and they felt heard, but they're not, I don't see them. So I will oftentimes, I'll reply all to make sure everyone sees that, like, at least somebody, hit the ball back to that side of the table. I try and say at the beginning, I'm not writing on behalf of my fellow members. I'm just saying, my little bit. But I would love if we had a policy that was just like, whoever sees it first sends a reply all that says, thank you so much for reaching out. Our protocol is that our chair or our secretary or whoever will get back to you within, 2 days. Please be patient, waiting for the reply, something like that. And then that would take all the pressure off, any of us to have to respond to make this person feel heard.
Yeah, I think, some of the danger in, you could do a reply all as long as everyone's clear that then you don't start deliberating, right?
Yeah, I think this group is really good about that. No one's used
and
it
I
to-
think, because the danger in individuals replying without anyone else knowing that you're replying is that if you put in an opinion or something that's not just informational or not just a thank you, then you run the risk of someone getting different opinions and just causing confusion. Laura, go ahead.
And just because this is happening quite a bit, and I'm hoping, Ben, from your perspective, because often you get these as well, the same things, or sometimes we get things that say like, can you, I'm really unhappy about this, I'm not getting what I need from the superintendent, like the bus situation that happened. We got emails about that. What do you think is like, do we forward those to you for response if it's on an operational issue or?
Yeah, I communicated over the weekend about this, it's helpful to on certain things. It's helpful to two things are helpful. And I think this is a general rule is, and I'm not going to speak to like, should the school committee respond and your email, okay, but from any school committee member or from a group, it's helpful to say 2 things. One, first ask the person to contact the person who can help them most directly, which typically is not any of you, no disrespect, okay? But it's gonna be a teacher, it could be a guidance counselor, it could be a principal, okay? It's always safe to refer to the principal, okay? Don't have you refer that person to the principal, okay? That can also be referred to me, especially if they have said they've talked to the principal numerous times to know and haven't gotten the desired effect. I'm a little wary of that, honestly, just because I'm going to typically go right back to the principal. Okay, so that's one. And then also make sure, so that's a typical way of doing it. Make sure they're dealing with the person closest to their action. And the other piece is to, bring it to my attention so then I can follow up as necessary, and that's happened recently, and two social media cases were brought to my attention. And then I could, follow up and address them with the appropriate parties, that sort of thing. When I get emails, blasted emails around the same topic, I'll try to create a response that applies to many of them, or much of it can apply to many of them, and then I adjust as necessary. It isn't always possible for me to reply to every single one. I would like to. Maybe in future years I'll be able to. This year it's not been possible to respond to everyone, honestly.
Yeah, okay. And that actually relates, just since we're just finishing up, the social media issue that happens. I mean, this was the same policy that you suggested for that. I tend to, so Dorothy, this is like when people are talking about the schools or, the school committees, schools on social media. I rarely respond to those, and sometimes I think I told one of you, I almost referred someone to our manual, but or to distinguishing what the administration does and what the school committee does. But in general, I avoid responding on social media, and I don't know if we have a policy on that.
I think that, avoiding responding on social media is always a good idea. Unless you can respond, sometimes if you see something that is wrong, right? Someone has misinformation, just responding with, like you said, here's the document, go to this place, ask this person, so that you're not responding to get into a debate with them. You're just sending them to the place that they belong, and in order to get the right information out there. So it sounds like, if you're not responding unless you're stepping in and saying, here's the information that you're looking for, that is appropriate. So anything else that I'm looking at the clock, this has gone by fast, but it is 9 o'clock, so we've been at this a while. Have we covered everything that you want to cover? And do you want to think about, are there any next steps that come out of this?
Well, I think there's a couple of policies and procedures that we should review and consider, particularly the, if Joel wants to, I can't remember the policy again. We could take that up. That says we're going, I think it's a policy, maybe it's a procedure. Or how we respond to emails as a group, that, because I think one of the things that's happened a lot is that we're getting a lot more group, emails sent to all of us. It used to be, you just get one or something to one team, and then you'd have to make sure everybody else saw it. But now they just send them to us all.
Yeah.
But and anything else, but we can take that up. We can make a list of what we want to review in our policy and procedures, and do it.
So the other thing, Jonathan, you sent me your operating protocols.
Mm-hmm.
That had a date of 2017 and said they would be reviewed more regularly than once every 4 years.
Yeah.
So,
well, we did
pointing that out.
Yeah, we did review them a year ago.
Oh, okay.
But we didn't change them, so they didn't get redone with a date on them. I mean, perhaps that's what we should have done.
Yeah. So I know back at the very beginning, I think it was either Laura or Samantha said maybe you needed to think about members of, school committee members attending a subcommittee meeting maybe should be panelists as opposed to, should be attendees as opposed to panelists. Yeah. To sort of make sure that you're following that open meeting law protocol of the way they are as members of the public. I don't know if there's anything else that we talked about that would trigger another discussion about operating protocols. If you want to, Melissa mentioned, the possibility of a meeting to sort of talk about the way you work together, anything like that that you feel you might want to follow up on?
I mean, I would like to, yes, have a meeting and just in relation to our sort of working relationship, but also have the conversation about goals, have a more intentional conversation about goals and how they intersect or support the district goals, because I just don't think we've had the time or the space to really have that conversation.
And I think, that I'm thinking about two things. One, getting Ben's input on when is the right time to have that conversation. And, a lot of school committees, I think, particularly since the educator evaluation model has come into place, that goal setting discussion should take place in the right time where the district as a whole and where Ben is working with his administrative and leadership team on goal setting. And that's aspect one, is what is the right timing to have that be a meaningful discussion that really ties everything together. And secondly, thinking about how long is it till you can actually meet in person, and would it be better to wait until you can actually be together in person to have some of those discussions?
I say yes, absolutely, to wait until we're in person to have a lot of these discussions, but I don't know what Ben's thoughts are on timing.
Yeah, so I would say that in terms of goals, and the committee goals obviously are what you, as Dorothy said earlier, what this body does to, in your realm of and sphere of influence to further district goals, right? Because we'll be doing a lot of work on that in the next few months, meaning leadership team and myself and others, and then bring them to you in the summertime. I would say it may make sense to focus first on, your operating norms, your norms for, behavior, interaction, that sort of stuff, work on how you guys are operating together as a body. And then as you have that in place and start operating, operating that way, then the goals come in, and then you can, work on those. And just in terms of timing, I think that would make sense. I would suggest that as a sort of order of operations.
That makes sense to me, but it's not me who's gonna.
Okay. Anything else that we need to work on? Okay. Thank you, Dorothy.
Can I just close by saying one thing?
Sure.
I've worked with a lot of school committees, ones I've worked for and ones I've worked with, not only in the state, but other, they call them school boards other places, except for Rhode Island. This is first of all, it's a great committee to work with. Okay. And I appreciate that a whole lot. But also, it's also a committee that is a lot higher functioning than most I've worked with. And it's hard to see that perhaps because you are just yourselves, but you should, don't lose sight of that, please. Okay. Sure. They're challenges and, and they come up from time to time, but you should just believe me when I say it could be far worse. And that's not high praise, but I am trying to just give some perspective that they're challenges, there always are in any team. But this is a high functioning team, a well functioning team that I think wants to become a high functioning team.
I would with, I work with committees all over the state. I would concur with Ben on that one.
we want to be high functioning. We want to be excellent in this school system and extraordinary in our schools, in each classroom. So that's what we shoot for. But yeah, this is already well functioning. And, we'll keep working on it.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Dorothy, for all of facilitating this meeting. It's very important that we just keep doing this and keep working at it.
All right, well, I was gonna say you're welcome, and you know where to find me if you want my help with any follow-up work.
Okay.
Thank you, Dorothy. Always good to have
Thanks.
you.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Thanks for,
Thank you,
Okay.
Dorothy.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you.
Ben, thanks for joining.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Absolutely.
Second,
Well, you know what? Not for nothing. I've worked on city council. I've worked a lot of them. And I'll tell you something, Joe, you keep us on our toes. So you make us working. Laura brings diversity. Samantha brings us social working. I love working with Melissa because the fact is, yes, she is an attorney, Kathy from before, Jonathan. But I must say, Ben, I really must say that, you know what? I truly enjoy working with you. You don't look down to us or the teachers. You do respect all of us, or, sometimes even Joel or me or whatever, going back and forth, which is very helpful because you know what?
Hey,
It is. We're at a time right now that it is difficult, people, and we're getting more emails, more things, and they want to be responded to because they feel that they never had that chance. Okay. They felt that doesn't. So, you know what? Don't give up. And the fact is, I agree that if someone responds, send it to the principal, send it to the superintendent, but just Ben, let us know that you answered it or something so we don't keep hearing it. And I know it's hard, everyone. Please, I'm a social media queen, and I know it's hard when it's on there, when you hear all these stories. We all said it. Kathy got it. I got it. We all get it. We're all sending it to Ben and everything else. And it's kind of hard because we don't know who's sending what. And they want to be responded to, or you hear it and you get frustrated because on social media you want to answer and you want to say, wait a minute, that's not how it happened, or why? And because everyone just wants to put negative or something else, it's hard. And so, but you know what? I can't wait to all go out in person, and I don't care if we just even talk about me. It doesn't matter. No, because everyone else is. But the fact is that you're right. We didn't have a chance. We got elected in November again, for those who came, and then it was COVID, and then it was just crazy, and it's hard. And those who have children at home, it's even worse because you go, I got the kid, the dog, the cat, and trying to do Zoom and trying to be there for everyone. So you know what, you all, I really must say that, you know what, I really thank you because you've given it your all, and it's reassuring. I have grandkids in the school, and so it's reassuring that you're on the school committee too. So thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank
Mayor.
you. So we have a motion and a second to adjourn. Maria, could we have a roll call vote?
Mr. Favazza,
Yes.
Chairman Pope,
Yes.
Ms. Prince,
yes, good night, everyone.
Mayor Taken,
Yes, good night, everyone, and thank you.
Ms. Watson,
Yes, good night.
Ms. Weason,
Yes, thanks,
and
everyone.
Kathy Clancy.
yes, good night, everyone.
Thank you very much. This meeting's adjourned.
Thank you again, Dorothy.
Yep, good night.
Good night.